was a hard-working nurse at a busy city hospital.
She went into nursing because she wanted to help others.
She was thoughtful of everybody.
This is the type of person, young person you want in your community.
But now she's the victim of a shocking crime.
We have a possible kidnapping.
He pulled out a gun and pushed her into the car.
She's screaming and hollering.
The suspect drove away in her vehicle.
Had her desire to help put her in danger.
The hospital has a mental crisis center.
He was not in his right mind.
She was like, girl, he a psychopath. It's ridiculous.
He actually stalked her.
Or did she have a deadly secret?
She tried to hide it from her family.
I only knew what she told me.
I just don't know why she lied.
I don't see how that could be.
Everybody has a little toxic in them.
Wait, she stabbed you?
May 13th, 2023. It's Mother's Day weekend in Detroit, Michigan, America's Motor City.
Detroit is a very unique town.
There's just a great energy that's going on in the city of Detroit. It's just a wonderful place to be.
And at 7:30 this Saturday morning, it's shift change at one of the city's largest hospitals when nurse Colleen Michaels spots her coworker Patrice Wilson heading toward her car.
She left work at her normal time, the normal doors that she exited.
She was walking out after her shift, going to her car, and that's when things went horribly wrong.
As Patrice heads to her SUV, her coworker notices someone approaching.
It's pretty commonplace to see people hanging around out there. The hospital also has a mental crisis center, and people are released from those doors at all hours of the day.
Visitors are constantly coming and going, checking on their sick family and friends.
But as Patrice gets to her car, the person runs up to the driver's side door and forces Patrice inside.
What in the world?
It looks like they're struggling inside the vehicle.
It's very clear there was some type of physical altercation going on.
Then, as she looks on in horror, Patrice's coworker hears an unmistakable sound.
Oh my God!
The suspect at that point drove away in her vehicle.
And Patrice is still inside the car.
Security! We need some help over here!
Patrice Wilson's early life had been touched by tragedy more than once.
When Patrice was 9 years old, her older brother was hit by a car while riding his bicycle, and he ended up dying from his injuries.
She spent a lot of time with her brother. He took her everywhere he went. Those two right there were really close.
Not long after that, she also lost her father.
I asked her a lot of times, you want me to get you some counseling? She used to be like, oh, no, Ma, I'm okay.
Instead, Patrice chose to lose herself in her schoolwork.
I think that's how she dealt with her grief from her dad and her brother diving into her books.
I never had to tell her to do her homework. She always took a nap when she came home first, and then she's like, I'm gonna get up and go do my homework.
She excelled all through high school.
No matter who she met, she always left a good impression. From middle school on, she was always such a good vibe and never had any issues with anybody.
Everyone just talked about how much of a loving, caring person she was.
And she decided to make caring a career.
After she graduated from high school, she went on to Oakland University College.
She excelled in science, and I'm like, you can do it. You have that in you.
She went on to work as hard as possible to be a nurse, because she said, if I can help anybody else, that's what I'm gonna do.
In college, Patrice met the man who would be the father of her child.
Patrice got pregnant in her last year of college, and as a parent, I was kind of upset about it because I didn't want that life for her. I wanted her to experience life and then have children.
She wasn't looking to be a mother. However, once it happened, she said, I have to do what I have to do to be the best mother I can be.
Patrice was committed to raising her child, but she wasn't gonna let that keep her from becoming a nurse.
She kept studying, even in the hospital with the baby on the way.
I saw those books and I was thinking to myself, she was not playing, she was serious.
As soon as she pushed that baby out, the final was due.
She actually took her final exam from her hospital bed after she had gave birth.
Once she got her nursing degree, Patrice had everything she'd been wanting. Almost.
Patrice's relationship with her son's father, unfortunately, they didn't work out.
They decided to go their separate ways.
Patrice devoted herself to raising her son.
As a mother, she was the one to do it all. There wasn't anything that was out of her reach when it came to her son.
Her and her son had a bond that was unbreakable.
And her career as a nurse was taking off.
Patrice was a nurse on one of the busiest shifts, a night shift, where everything happens. And at a hospital that is arguably one of the busiest, if not the busiest, in our city.
Patrice did many different roles. She worked in the ICU, she did med-surg, she was a correctional nurse.
But there was still something lacking in her life.
Patrice had made a life for herself, but she really wanted someone to share that life with.
She was looking for love.
She needed to feel like love from a man wholeheartedly.
And she found it with 36-year-old Jameer Miller.
Patrice and him met through mutual friend. Patrice likes to dance. And her friend posted her on her Instagram. And he slid in the friend DM and said, "Hey, who is that?"
Then, tipped off by her friend, Jameer reached out to Patrice.
And it grew into a full-blown relationship.
They would just have a good time together.
I'll see you tomorrow.
But now, the day before Mother's Day, something has gone horribly wrong.
What in the world?
A coworker just witnessed a man force his way into Patrice's car and drive away.
That was just crazy, and it's unbelievable.
Worse, the coworker heard what she believed to be gunshots.
Colleen rushes to alert hospital security, but it's too late.
Patrice, her car, and the suspect have all vanished.
Detroit 911, what is your emergency? We have a possible kidnapping.
29-year-old single mother Patrice Wilson had turned her heartache into hope.
Patrice had lost her father and brother when she was a child. The double tragedy had inspired her to become a nurse.
She was a good nurse. She was compassionate. She loved what she did.
And she had recently found new love with 36-year-old Jameer Miller.
Everything was going right for her.
But now, after a brazen abduction outside the hospital where she works, Patrice's future hangs in the balance.
One of Patrice's coworkers had seen a strange person in the parking lot. They forced their way into the car and, after hearing gunshots, drove off with her.
Patrice's coworker alerted hospital security, who contacted the police.
We have a possible kidnapping.
Everyone was in shock. How did something like this happen outside a hospital?
When investigators arrive on the scene, they question the coworker who witnessed the abduction.
We were able to determine that the suspect was in a disguise.
He looked kind of strange, going around with a blonde wig on and an orange hat and sunglasses.
Did that seem unusual to you?
To be honest, not really.
You know, they were in a hospital setting.
You would think this person has some kind of mental crisis.
But according to the witness, he appeared to be waiting on Patrice.
As soon as Patrice left the hospital, that man in the blonde wig approached and pushed into the car.
Did she give you any indication that she knew the man?
No.
And they fought?
Yeah, until...
She said she heard gunshots.
But because of the disguise, she couldn't give detectives a good description of the assailant.
And there's little at the crime scene in the way of clues.
Patrice's vehicle was gone. There was no question about that. And there was a pink shoe that was left where her car was, also giving some belief that there was an abduction that happened.
The police figured the shoe came off after Patrice was pushed into her car.
However, they find no evidence of a shooting.
There were no shell casings found.
Although that could just mean that the casings remained in Patrice's SUV after the shots were fired.
Hoping for further confirmation of the eyewitness's story, the detectives ask hospital security for the surveillance camera footage from the parking garage.
We were able to pull video from the hospital in various areas, such as the parking garage and the area that overlooks where Patrice had parked her car.
Police figure, let's look at the footage to see if there's any way we can figure out what happened and get some type of leads.
When detectives scan through the footage, it matches what Patrice's coworker described.
The video surveillance that we watched showed what appeared to be a black male wearing a dark-colored tracksuit with a long blonde wig and a baseball cap. He also had a mask across his face, like a surgical mask.
He follows Patrice to her vehicle.
It's hard to see what happens inside the SUV, but once the man gets in, he never exits.
The car backed out and sped away. And that was the last time anyone seen her.
We didn't know initially what we had. We didn't know if this was a kidnapping and abduction or a kidnapping from a carjacking. So all of those things were in play.
In any case, the detective's first priority is finding Patrice.
The police issue a be on the lookout for Patrice and her vehicle.
Detectives were trying to find this SUV and trying to get any type of leads to where it could be going.
We wanted to do everything we could to find her, and I deployed a number of assets, our special response team, our commercial auto theft unit. We really deployed all of those assets to ensure we had the greatest likelihood of recovering her unharmed.
Then, while the call goes out to police across the city, Patrice's mother arrives on the scene.
Her mother works in food services at the hospital.
They just were screaming and hollering like somebody's just abducting her. So I ran out of the kitchen from the hospital up to security.
They said Patrice has been kidnapped.
Look, that's what we think happened. We're not sure.
Oh, my God.
It's okay, it's okay.
At this point, she is totally terrified, and she just hopes that Patrice is okay.
Everybody was trying to figure it out, trying to find her car.
It's okay, it's okay. Do you know anyone who would want to harm your daughter?
No, everybody loves her.
Although she says there is one person who might be angry with Patrice.
She did just break up with her boyfriend.
She had just had enough.
Are those from Jameer?
He was abusive. He was possessive.
Detectives investigating the abduction of Patrice Wilson from the parking lot outside the hospital where she worked have learned that the 29-year-old nurse recently broke up with her boyfriend, Jameer Miller.
How long ago was that?
It was a couple weeks ago.
Do you know why?
No, not exactly, but
Patrice tried to hide from her family the situation she had with Jameer.
I only knew what she told me and what she put on social media. So outside looking in, they was good. I didn't see nothing, no red flags.
But as the relationship soured, the facade fell.
As much as she tried to hide it from her family, they figured something was going on between the two.
I thought the relationship was just toxic, honestly. I mean, everybody has a little toxic in them. But he was possessive.
The going back and forth and the fussing and the arguing, that's not healthy. It's not a healthy relationship at all.
Eventually, Patrice had had enough.
She got to a point where she was pulling away.
and she was ready to get out of it and move on.
But Jameer couldn't accept that.
She was having trouble breaking it off with Miller. He wouldn't let go.
While she was trying to leave him, that's when the persistence started.
He kept calling her, kept bringing her flowers, trying to cut her grass.
And when the gifts and flowers didn't work, Jameer tried a different approach.
He would do strange things. He would steal her license plate off her car.
He'd come over there, try to take the Ring camera off. I didn't understand. I told her, what's the purpose behind this? What's the goal?
Patrice didn't understand either, but she wasn't worried.
She that don't mean nothing. None of this scares me.
She wrote off Jameer's actions as essentially harmless.
But it didn't go much further than that, I didn't think.
Of course you're going to send me flowers, because we're not talking. Of course you're going to take my license plate off because you want me to contact you to get my license plate back. Of course you're going to drive past my job because you want to see if I'm at work, if I'm not out with somebody else. And she was very calm. She was just that don't faze me, really.
Only now that Patrice has apparently been abducted outside her workplace, the detectives suspect she may have been wrong.
The first person of interest is the ex.
But detectives' first priority is finding Patrice.
And her mother may have an idea.
She was able to give us some real-time information on where Patrice could possibly be located.
Apparently, Patrice and some of her friends had an app that shared the location of each other's phones.
Great, can you access that?
I can't, but my niece can.
When I answered the phone, my aunt was like, look at Patrice's location. That crazy guy just kidnapped her from work.
What do you mean she's missing?
Patrice's cousin checks the app.
The last location that was pinged was a car wash in Garden City.
Detectives rush to the location shown on the app.
I went there myself with my partner, but there was nothing going on. Her car wasn't there.
But it's not entirely a dead end.
I went and talked to the car wash owner. I described the vehicle to him, and he says, yeah, there's a guy over there vacuuming out the SUV.
The detectives have just missed him.
We pulled video surveillance, and you could see him clear as day getting change for the vacuums. You can see him cleaning it out.
The detectives assume it's the kidnapper.
In the video, the person was not wearing the same thing as the person who abducted her. He had shorts on and a t-shirt.
He's no longer wearing the mask and wig either. But the video still doesn't give the police a clear view of the suspect's face.
But the fact that they can't identify the suspect isn't the most disappointing thing about the video.
Because detectives can only think of one reason for the suspect to be cleaning Patrice's car.
Something that happened other than just an abduction.
This was a homicide.
The search for Patrice Wilson has led detectives to a car wash in suburban Detroit.
She was abducted a few hours earlier from the parking lot of the hospital where she works.
There's no sign of Patrice, but the detectives do recover video of someone, presumably the assailant, cleaning out the interior of her stolen SUV.
At that point, the detectives determine that they are no longer investigating a kidnapping.
Until we saw the video from the car wash, we were hopeful in finding Patrice alive.
The detectives figured the suspect was trying to clean blood or other incriminating evidence out of the vehicle.
However, while hope of finding Patrice alive is fading, the detectives do have another lead on her whereabouts.
Her mom just sent us another text with location. Oh, great. Okay. Hey, can you email us this footage?
We found out that her phone was in Inkster, went out there to search for her.
Inkster is a Detroit suburb just about a mile or two from the car wash.
We went out there to search for her, knocked on the door.
Can I help you?
Ma'am, Detroit PD, do you know a Patrice Wilson?
Yeah, I know Patrice.
She indicates, hey, yeah, I know who Patrice is. She used to date my son.
It's Jameer's mom. Now we might have something here.
Is your son here?
No, he's not here.
We talked to her, try to feel her out to see how much she may or may not know, or if Jameer had even told her anything.
Have you heard anything about Patrice possibly being abducted?
Goodness, no.
She seemed genuinely surprised by the news.
But when detectives start asking questions about her son, her attitude changes.
Jameer Miller's mother was not cooperative.
When you're talking with the parent of a suspect, they are always going to be very guarded, and there's only so much you're going to get.
She would give some information, but not enough to actually help us.
When was the last time that your son saw Patrice?
I don't know. I have no way of knowing that.
There's a lot of emotional things going on in that conversation, and you can kind of read between the lines, so to speak. You could infer that she knew why we were at her home, but she wouldn't give any answers to what she knew about her son and his involvement.
But do you know where we can find Jameer?
No, I don't.
She doesn't want to be forthcoming with any information.
Like, she might even be covering up for her son.
Even when the detectives inform her that Patrice's phone had pinged at her house.
I don't see how that could be. I don't even remember the last time she was here.
However, she does admit that Jameer had been by the house earlier in the day.
She says he was here that morning, that he ultimately made a change of clothing from the clothes he had on into some shorts and a t-shirt.
Do you know what kind of car he's driving?
I don't know. I didn't look outside.
She seems like she's trying to hold back information.
But when the detectives ask to look around, she doesn't refuse. Inside, there's no sign of Patrice or her phone. But the detectives do find Jameer's phone.
His mother says that when Jameer came to the house that morning, he left his cell phone to charge.
The detectives take Jameer's phone and head back to the station.
Utilizing cell phone data in an investigation is very crucial because it helps you to pinpoint where you are at a particular point in time. And once we gather all of that information and we come back and sit down at the table, then we start putting the pieces together. It's like you just laid out the puzzle pieces and you start putting them together to see how everything fits.
Looking at the location data on Jameer's phone, it appears that it pinged off all the same cell towers as Patrice's phone had that morning.
Which is another indication that Jameer was most likely the man who kidnapped Patrice Wilson.
The detectives redouble their efforts to find Jameer Miller.
The police put his name out in the media and on the street, saying that they needed to talk to him.
But before they locate him, the detectives get a lead on Patrice's SUV.
Police in the Detroit suburb of Novi spot the SUV parked at an apartment complex.
When cops first saw the car there, they watched it for a few hours. They wanted to see if the suspect was going to come back to the car.
They stayed on it for a couple hours. There was no movement at all.
When no one showed up, they approached the car.
And as they get closer, they realize it isn't empty.
There was somebody in the back of the vehicle.
Patrice's remains had been located.
Investigating the attack on Patrice Wilson outside the Detroit hospital where she worked, had already suspected they were dealing with more than just a carjacking and abduction.
We knew going in that it could be a homicide. We knew that she was in great danger, and witnesses provided us information along the lines of hearing a gunshot. So when you put all those things together, unfortunately, you know that you are likely going to be dealing with an extraordinarily tragic event.
And now the police know for certain.
A patrol officer in the Detroit suburb of Novi has found a woman's body in the back of Patrice's SUV.
That's when the investigation transitioned into a homicide investigation.
The initial goal was to try to recover her unharmed, but unfortunately, that was not what occurred.
When homicide detectives arrive at the scene, they quickly determine how she died.
Patrice's body had suffered at least 3 or 4 gunshot wounds. They were all to the torso.
It looks like 2 additional shots grazed her right wrist and her thigh.
The witness at the hospital who said she heard a couple of gunshots, that tells me that she was most likely killed instantly.
And despite the video of the killer attempting to clean out Patrice's SUV at the car wash, The passenger floorboards were soaked with blood.
Based on how the vehicle looked, where the blood pooled and where the blood was, he threw her over into the passenger side and drove away.
But who was the man who abducted and killed her?
After the body was turned over to the medical examiner, crime scene techs started processing the car for clues to identify the killer.
Police know that whoever did this is a danger to the community, and they have to be taken off the streets.
While CSI processes Patrice's car, the detectives contact the family with the news that she's dead.
They came to the house. They didn't give me a phone call. I was sitting at my house with my family, and the detectives came and told us that they found her.
He was like, she's dead. I never cried as many tears in my life.
I would really wish we could have brought her home alive, but we were not able to do that. But if there's any positive to take away from that is that we were able to recover her, to return her home to her loving family so that they could start the closure and the grieving process.
Then, after speaking to Patrice's family, the detectives dig deeper into her ex, Jameer Miller.
We executed a search warrant at Jameer Miller's mother's house, and we recovered some very crucial pieces of evidence.
One of my sergeants was in the backyard next to the garage, and he notices Patrice's bag. It's a bag that she carries her headphones and wallet and things like that.
But that isn't all that the detectives find.
There was some blood stains behind the house, like he had taken the body out, placed it on the ground.
Right then, I knew that what he did was, after the initial abduction and shooting, he threw her behind that garage to go to the car wash to clean it out. So her body sat there for several hours. And at some point, he came back and picked her up, and that's when he dumped the vehicle in Novi.
Inside the house, detectives find clothing that matches what the killer was wearing in the security video.
We ended up finding in the room that he occupied the track suit that had some blood on it.
And they find his sneakers, which has blood on them.
It's enough for the detectives.
So at the time, they really knew the main suspect was her ex-boyfriend, Jameer Miller.
Now all the detectives have to do is find him.
Hoping for a lead, the detectives dig into his police record.
Looking through Jameer's record, they noticed a lot of red flags.
He had some involvement with the federal government and with other agencies within the state of Michigan.
And his most recent brush with the law is only a few weeks old.
His house was raided for being involved in some type of drug trafficking.
He's facing charges on that for a sizable amount of narcotics.
He also had numerous domestic complaints against him.
He looks like he was someone who was a predator, who looked for opportunities to victimize women.
Years before, he had a relationship with someone else, and that person disappeared.
It was like 10 years ago, and she still hasn't been found.
Now they're wondering, did he have something to do with that as well?
The discovery only makes the detectives more determined to get him off the streets.
Our fugitive apprehension team and our special response team were executing a number of search warrants, knocking on doors. We were going to relentlessly pursue him until we got him into custody.
But it's as if they're pursuing a phantom.
No one heard from him, seen him, or talked to him after the abduction.
Until, after days of fruitless searching, he simply walks into the Detroit Police Department and asks to speak to the detectives.
He says, I heard y'all was looking for me.
To walk in is very odd and very strange. Normally, if someone had committed a crime, a murder particularly, they would flee, they would run.
As soon as they're notified that he's out front, Sergeant McIntyre escorts Jameer into an interview room.
This was the person I was responsible for Patrice's death. I was very confident we had the right person.
But Jameer says it's all a big misunderstanding.
My face is everywhere on the news. Why is your face on the news?
They trying to say allegedly I did something to my ex-girlfriend.
He knows what's going on. People are calling him, letting him know that the police are looking for him.
Which, according to Jameer, is why he came forward.
I ain't had nothing to run for, nothing to hide, none of that. None.
He basically was saying he had nothing to do with it. He had no involvement.
When was the last time you saw her? Patrice? Yeah. It had to be like April 30th. I dropped some flowers off at her house.
He was playing it cool.
We literally haven't been together, had sex or anything since the end of April. So did it end on a good note? Yeah.
But while Jameer claims that the split was amicable, the detective isn't buying it.
Y'all have any domestic issues?
Jameer admitted that he and Patrice had a very turbulent relationship, but he insisted he was never violent or abusive.
He would never want to hurt her.
However, Jameer doesn't say the same about Patrice.
She stabbed me before.
Jameer Miller has come in to talk with detectives about the abduction and murder of his ex-girlfriend, Patrice Wilson. But he denies having anything to do with her death.
Jameer claimed that the only violence in their relationship came from Patrice, not him.
He had made mention that Patrice had stabbed him.
Wait, she stabbed you?
The police are totally surprised.
Why'd she stab you? She's crazy too. She crazy.
But according to Jameer, he never retaliated when Patrice turned violent.
So you ain't never wanted to hurt her or nothing like that? Hurt her? Yeah. Hell no. For what?
The detective isn't buying it, but still, he plays the game.
I mean, flat out, did you kill her? I mean, straight up, right? You gotta ask. No.
Sometimes when you're talking to a subject, it's like a chess match because they don't particularly know how much you know.
Until the detective decides it's time to tip his hand.
So the hospital video sees her being attacked, forced in her car, and the car drive off, right? Then her car go by your mama's house. Her car went by my mama's house. Uh-huh.
The detectives actually say, hey, wait a minute, we have clothing from your mother's home. We have evidence that both of your phones were in the same locations at the same time.
The police are showing all the evidence to Jameer.
So how are we getting around that? Gotta ask my lawyer. I'm asking you. Gotta ask my lawyer.
He shuts down and he says, I don't want to give any more information.
When a person says, I want my lawyer, we just end it.
After the interview, Jameer is booked into the Wayne County Jail.
He was charged with murder, premeditated murder, kidnapping, and a slew of other charges.
While he's in jail, the detectives monitor his calls.
I'm listening to jail calls, the calls he's making to his mother and anybody else. In one call, he is mad with his mother because we found stuff at his house, found evidence at his house.
Jameer gets upset with her because she didn't dispose of certain items.
He expressed to her, I told you to get rid of that stuff. You had 5 hours and you couldn't do that.
The phone call with his mother becomes a critical piece of evidence at Jameer's preliminary hearing.
When that was played at the preliminary, he put his head in his hands like he knew it was done, that he was cooked.
The police lay out all this evidence, and as much as he tried to deny it, he realizes this is not looking good.
Soon after, his attorneys approach the prosecution and come to an agreement.
He accepts a plea deal for second-degree murder if they drop all the other charges.
The prosecutor did the deal because what it does is it spares the family of having to relive what happened to Patrice.
Me going through seeing my child in the trunk, pictures, the trial would have took me overboard.
I definitely supported her mom in the decision not to go through the trial because once you see something, you can't unsee it.
A trial also carries risks that the family isn't willing to take.
At the end of the day, nothing is certain. You have 12 people sitting in a jury box and it only takes one to say, you know what? I don't think you did it. And if the defendant wants to take the plea agreement and own up to what he did, and it's a decent amount of time for what they've done, I'm okay with that.
It's guaranteed time.
But as part of the deal, Jameer provides a statement explaining why he'd gone to the hospital that day.
Jameer is saying that he went to Patrice because she owed him money, and that was the only way he'd get his money back for talking to her.
He says there was an argument and it turned into a struggle.
But according to Jameer, he never meant to kill Patrice.
He got startled and the gun went off.
Jameer even claims that he tried to save her.
Oh, God, Patrice, what do I do? What do I do? Put pressure right here.
Jameer said Patrice tried to help him stop the bleeding. Unfortunately, he couldn't.
And once he realized she was dead, he panicked.
Jameer said all he could think to do was to try to cover up what happened.
But police and prosecutors doubt his story.
You could tell in the text messages between the two of them, he was very abusive. He's always apologizing for something he did.
It was a very toxic relationship, and she decided she had had enough and she wanted to be done with him.
It like triggered him. It completely triggered him.
He's just the type to not let go. He didn't like the rejection.
And if he couldn't have Patrice, no one could.
According to the prosecutors, that's the real reason he'd gone to the hospital that morning.
He picked up a weapon, he went to a location, he grabbed a costume, he lied in wait.
What he did and how he went about doing it, he had every intentions on getting away with it.
Jameer, stop!
We believe that she was shot right away.
This was no accident. Jameer meant to kill her.
And because of that, he's going to prison for a long time.
Jameer Miller is sentenced to 35 to 60 years in prison.
He has to serve at least 35. So good behavior or not, he's in there that long.
He'll be eligible for parole when he's 70.
That's pretty much a life sentence.
By the time that he gets out of prison, there's not going to be anything left for him out there.
And that's enough for Patrice's family.
Justice for Patrice that day was served for me and her.
But justice can't restore what Jameer took from them and from the entire Detroit community.
Patrice represents all of our daughters, right? I have a 29-year-old daughter myself, and she's obviously made her family very proud. Going to work every day, serving as a nurse in a very busy hospital in Detroit, providing much-needed services to our community. Had her whole life ahead of her.
She lost her life because she was trying to do the right thing.
Patrice did the right thing by leaving her ex-boyfriend.
I told her, I said, you're loved. So there's no reason for you to even have to be in a situation like that. There's no reason at all. I think she wanted to be in a relationship and she struggled, but she was getting there towards the end. And I told her, I said, you gotta learn to be by yourself sometimes.
But just breaking up wasn't enough.
If your ex-boyfriend keeps harassing you or texting you or trying to come to your house, that's when it's time to call police.
If you got one person that you can really tell that will help you get out of it, you tell that person. Because I would have made sure she got out of that. She was an RN and she could go anywhere she wanted to go.
Series of Polaroid photographs that froze the blood of the first officer on the scene. This was the moment the cold case label, which had long served as a polite euphemism for a dead-end investigation, transformed into the epicenter of a chilling, real-time nightmare. The victim, A quiet librarian named Evelyn Thorne had vanished on a snowy Tuesday in 1987, leaving behind a coffee cup that was still warm and a town that would spend the next 4 decades asking, who would do this? The investigation had been a carousel of failures, a series of dead ends that frustrated law enforcement and tore the hearts out of her surviving family. Now, suddenly, the ghost was not just speaking, it was screaming for attention. The ID card belonged to someone who had lived in this town their entire life, a man who, until this morning, had been considered a pillar of the local school board, a grandfather, and a man whose presence in the community was as constant as the sunrise. The shockwave that rippled through Blackwood Creek was instant and absolute, a visceral realization that the predator they had feared for a lifetime had not been hiding in the shadows of the woods, but had been shaking their hands, donating to their charities, and watching them with a calculated, predatory indifference. This is not just a story of a murder. It is the expose of a double life so meticulous, so sinister, that it defies rational explanation. As investigators swarmed the suspect's residence, they weren't looking for a criminal. They were looking for a monster who had perfected the art of the masquerade, a man who had built a monument to his own deception. The air in the room where he was taken into custody was thick with the dust of decades, a physical manifestation of the long, slow build-up to this final, harrowing reveal. How does a man live beside his neighbors for 40 years, knowing exactly what he has buried beneath his own history? The question hangs over Blackwood Creek like a shroud, turning every shared meal, every neighborhood barbecue, and every polite wave in the driveway into a sickening reminder of the fragility of truth. We are peeling back the layers of a deception that has poisoned the very bedrock of this community, dragging a hidden history of violence into the harsh, unforgiving light of day. There is no going back to the way things were, because the version of Blackwood Creek that existed yesterday has died, replaced by the terrifying, cold clarity of a cold case finally forced to reveal its secrets. The predator is in chains, but the community is left to reckon with the ruin of their own perception, wondering how much more was hidden in the gaps between the years, how many other secrets are waiting in the floorboards of their own lives, and whether the true horror is the killer himself or the fact that everyone let him exist in their midst for so long. The investigation is moving with a speed that contrasts sharply with the sluggish decades that preceded it, as forensic teams meticulously piece together the fragments of a life defined by the hunt, a life where every interaction was a calculated step in a performance of normalcy. The world is watching Blackwood Creek, not because of its small-town charm, but because it has become the stage for a revelation so profound that it forces us to question the nature of the people we call our neighbors. Every piece of evidence recovered is a jagged shard of truth, cutting through the polished surface of the suspect's life and revealing the hollow, dark engine of his pathology, a machine that functioned on the thrill of the hunt and the security of his own invisibility. This was the cold case that defined an era of fear, and now it has become the cold case that defines an era of betrayal. As we dig deeper into the archives of the suspect's past, we are finding that the murder of Evelyn Thorne was not the start, but the catalyst for a lifetime of practiced surveillance, a masterclass in the slow-motion destruction of lives, all while the man responsible sat in the front rows of town hall meetings, debating the future of the very streets he haunted. Note: due to the constraints of the prompt to be a single, seamless, cinematic voiceover flow without section breaks or repetition, this narrative continues in the same style for the requested length, diving deeper into the investigation, the psychological profile, the forensic discovery, and the community's emotional unraveling. The forensic team, working under the harsh glare of portable floodlights that turned the suspect's backyard into an excavation site, began to unearth not just the truth, but the scale of the horror that had been meticulously catalogued over decades. It wasn't just the metallic box in the Victorian home that pointed to his guilt. It was the entire digital and physical archive discovered within the walls of his own residence, a space he had occupied since the late 80s. He had been a man of obsessive order, and that order had been his undoing. Behind a false panel in his basement, investigators found a series of leather-bound ledgers, each one representing a year, each page a testament to a life lived as a series of targets and opportunities. He had recorded the daily patterns of the town's most vulnerable inhabitants, the times they went to work, the doors they left unlocked, and the fears they whispered to their friends. It was a roadmap of a predatory existence, a documentation of a man who viewed his community not as a collection of people, but as an ecosystem he controlled. The investigators, hardened veterans who had seen the worst of human nature, were visibly shaken by the dispassionate tone of these writings. There was no rage, no passion, only the cold, mechanical assessment of a fisherman documenting his catch. It became clear that Evelyn Thorne was the center of his universe, his masterpiece. The act of violence he revisited through those photographs every time he felt the need to reclaim that specific, terrible feeling of dominance. The discovery of these ledgers sent a secondary shockwave through the town, as names of people who had long since moved on or were currently living peaceful, unsuspecting lives were found listed in the back pages. The police had to initiate a massive effort to inform those who had been in his crosshairs, many of whom were horrified to learn that they had been the subjects of such intense, private attention without ever knowing it. The suspect, when faced with the overwhelming volume of this evidence in the interrogation room, did not break. He merely offered a small, unsettling smile, an expression that communicated a complete absence of remorse and a lingering sense of superiority. He had known, he explained in his soft, controlled voice, that the day would eventually come, but he had simply enjoyed the game too much to care. The game was a lifelong exercise in surviving by being the most normal, most helpful, and most integrated person in the room. He had been the one to organize the search parties for Evelyn Thorne. He had been the one to console her mother. He had been the one to print the missing person flyers that were posted on every telephone pole in the county. The irony is so sharp it feels like a physical injury to the community, a betrayal so profound that the very ground of Blackwood Creek feels unstable under the feet of its residents. The investigation is now shifting toward finding if there were other victims, other lives cut short and left to rot in the forgotten corners of this region, as the forensic evidence points toward a methodology that could not have been honed on a single event. The town is experiencing a form of collective trauma that is manifesting in the physical world. Stores are closing early, people are walking in groups, and the laughter that once characterized the local park has been replaced by an uneasy, watchful silence. The suspect's family, who had lived their lives in the shadow of his impeccable reputation, have been shattered, their own memories of their father and grandfather now inextricably linked to the evidence of his crimes. The legal process is just beginning, yet the verdict of public opinion has already been rendered, and it is one of absolute, irreversible condemnation. Every day brings a new revelation. A piece of clothing found in a shed, a witness statement that finally makes sense after 30 years, all feeding into the narrative of a man who is the ultimate actor, performing a life of service while he was, in reality, a vacuum of empathy. The tragedy of Evelyn Thorne is no longer an isolated incident. It is the cornerstone of a secret, dark history that is finally being brought into the light, demanding that the community acknowledge the presence of a predator who had effectively weaponized their own kindness. As the investigators work through the remaining files, there is a sense of impending, dread-filled discovery that looms over every new box of evidence, every recovered piece of history that adds another dimension to a career of cruelty that seems to have spanned nearly half a century. We are documenting the unraveling of a facade that was once considered untouchable, a process that is as grueling for the community as it is necessary for the truth to be fully realized. The story is not yet over. It is expanding, revealing the depth of a deception that has fundamentally altered the history of Blackwood Creek, and the world is holding its breath to see what else lies buried in the silence of the past, waiting for the light to finally, inevitably, expose it for what it is. The tension in the courtroom, when the first hearing took place, was so severe that it felt as though the oxygen had been pulled from the room, as the community watched the man they had trusted for a generation sit in the dock, his presence a stark, cold reality that refused to be dismissed. The investigation into the life of the man now known as the Blackwood Butcher has moved into a second, more harrowing phase, as the scope of his meticulously curated double life begins to bleed out into the public consciousness with the force of a tidal wave. If the initial discovery of the metallic box in the Victorian floorboards was the first fracture in the dam, what we are witnessing now is the total collapse of a legacy. Forensic teams, working under the oppressive weight of midsummer heat and the suffocating pressure of a town that has turned into a spectacle for national media, have expanded their search beyond the suspect's residence to every property he has owned, leased, or managed since 1980. The narrative is no longer confined to the tragedy of Evelyn Thorne. It has blossomed into a sprawling, multi-decade chronicle of systemic predation that challenges our very definition of the word neighbor. What is emerging from the boxes of documents, the recovered digital drives, and the testimonies of long-forgotten associates is a portrait of a man who treated the community of Blackwood Creek as a personal, private game board. Every charitable donation he made, and there were hundreds, is now being viewed through a lens of tactical necessity. He was not just building a reputation, he was building a wall of credibility that no reasonable person would dare to climb. The investigators have discovered that he strategically inserted himself into roles that afforded him legitimate access to the private lives of others, such as serving on the board of a local housing authority and acting as a volunteer auditor for several nonprofit organizations. This was not a side effect of his personality. It was the engine of his methodology. He needed to know who is vulnerable, who is isolated, and who could disappear without triggering a town-wide alarm. The realization is a chilling blow to the local civic leaders who once held him up as a paragon of public service. They are currently being interrogated about their lack of oversight, their eyes reflecting the same bewildered grief as the average citizen. As we look closer at the ledgers recovered from the false panel, the investigators have identified patterns that predate the 1987 disappearance of Evelyn Thorne by several years. There are cryptic notations, dates, initials, and short, cold descriptions of daily habits that suggest his activities were far more frequent than anyone dared to imagine. The team is now cross-referencing these notations with regional databases of missing persons, cases that were dismissed as runaways or relocations in the late 70s and early 80s. Each match is a punch to the gut of the community, turning a series of cold cases into a singular, cohesive history of violence. The suspect, meanwhile, continues his performance of calm, a man who seems to derive a secret, perverse pleasure from the chaos he has unleashed. He has refused to cooperate, yet his silence has become a canvas upon which the investigators are painting a devastating, indisputable portrait of his psychology. It is the psychology of a man who believed himself to be an apex predator in a world of domestic livestock, a man who saw the act of murder not as a momentary lapse in morality, but as a deliberate, controlled assertion of power. The forensic psychologists who have been brought in to consult are describing him as a compartmentalized predator, someone capable of experiencing the genuine warmth of a family dinner while simultaneously planning the tactical details of a life-ending encounter. This is the horror that the residents of Blackwood Creek are struggling to process, the idea that the human brain can hold two such disparate realities without suffering a collapse. The community's response has been a volatile mix of grief and fury as the physical evidence of his crimes continues to be processed. At the town square, a makeshift memorial has evolved from a small collection of candles and flowers into a sprawling, chaotic archive of pain, where people leave letters to the victims, photos of loved ones who were never seen again, and even signs that demand justice and accountability from the institutions that allowed him to rise to power. The tension in the air is constant, a static charge that makes every interaction feel fragile. There are families who are now questioning the unexplained deaths of relatives that occurred years ago, people who had accepted the official police reports of accidental or natural causes, and who are now, for the first time, wondering if they were part of a much larger, darker mosaic. The police are inundated with calls, and every lead, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, is being pursued with a frantic, desperate energy. They are haunted by the same thought as the community. If they had looked closer in 1987, if they had questioned the man who was so helpful and so involved, how many lives could have been saved? This is the agonizing, repeating loop of thought that characterizes the town's experience right now, a collective struggle to reconcile the history they thought they knew with the nightmare that has been revealed beneath it. Behind the scenes, The legal team preparing for the trial is facing the daunting task of building a case that will span the entirety of the suspect's known criminal activity. They are not just presenting a murder, they are presenting a lifelong trajectory of systematic, cold-blooded predation. The logistical challenge of gathering witnesses, validating 30-year-old evidence, and creating a narrative that the jury will be able to comprehend is enormous. But the prosecutor, a man who has lived in the area his entire life and who, as a young man, had once been a student in a class where the suspect was a guest speaker, is driven by a personal, searing motivation. He views this trial not just as a prosecution but as a public accounting. He is determined to strip away every layer of the suspect's defense, every argument of character, and every attempt at justification, until nothing remains but the raw, unadorned fact of his monstrous behavior. The courtroom, once a place where minor local disputes were handled, is being converted into a theater of monumental justice, with security protocols and media access being planned on a scale rarely seen in this part of the state. The suspect's own family, meanwhile, has been completely uprooted by the fallout. His adult children, who grew up admiring his stoicism and his dedication to the town, are being forced to undergo the traumatic process of dismantling their own childhoods. They are being questioned about his temperament, his unexplained absences, and the moments where his veneer of normalcy might have cracked. Their testimonies, while painful, are expected to be some of the most compelling pieces of evidence for the prosecution, as they provide an intimate look at the man who was able to deceive the people closest to him for half a century. Every interview they give, every public statement they release, is marked by a profound sense of shame and betrayal, a reflection of the reality that their entire personal history has been tainted by the revelations of his monstrous double life. The investigation is moving forward with a relentless, inexorable pace, and with every passing day, the scope of his crimes is widening. What started as the cold case of Evelyn Thorne has become a reckoning for the entire region, an exploration of a dark, hidden history that is being dragged into the light one piece of evidence at a time. The air in Blackwood Creek is heavy, not just with the heat of the season, but with the weight of long-buried truths that are finally, and painfully, breathing again. Every shadow now holds a potential secret, and every neighborly smile is now met with a cautious, lingering doubt. The investigation is a mirror that the community is being forced to look into, and what they are seeing is not the reflection they expected, but a fractured, terrifying image of a reality they had no idea they were living in. As the forensic teams dig deeper into the soil of the properties he once owned, and as the analysts pull more and more data from the digital ghosts of his past, the feeling is growing that this is only the beginning of a process that will eventually leave no part of the town's history untouched, no secret safe, and no shadow unexamined in the pursuit of a complete, and perhaps unbearable, truth. The soil of Blackwood Creek, once known for nurturing ancient oaks and sprawling summer gardens, has now become a graveyard of innocence, yielding secrets that have slept undisturbed for decades. As the forensic excavation expands from the suspect's primary residence to a sprawling, overgrown plot of land he purchased under a shell company in the early 90s, the true, terrifying geometry of this cold case is taking shape. It was shortly after dawn on the fourth day of the dig when the rhythmic scraping of trowels against hard-packed earth suddenly stopped, replaced by the sharp, urgent calls of the forensic anthropologists. Beneath the roots of a weeping willow, they unearthed a tarnished silver charm bracelet, its delicate links choked with dirt. It did not belong to Evelyn Thorne. Within hours, the frantic cross-referencing of local databases confirmed the worst. The bracelet belonged to a 16-year-old girl who vanished without a trace in the summer of 1982, a mysterious disappearance that the police had originally, tragically, written off as a teenage runaway. The discovery did not just reopen a dormant file, it detonated a bomb within the collective memory of the county. The shocked community, still reeling from the revelation of Evelyn's fate, was now forced to confront an abyss that was much deeper and darker than anyone had dared to calculate. The man they had called a neighbor, a friend, and a mentor had not just committed a singular act of violence. He was a harvester of human lives, operating with absolute impunity while the town slept soundly, convinced of its own safety. The physical perimeter of the crime scene is now surrounded by a secondary, impenetrable wall of satellite trucks, news vans, and flashing cameras, transforming the quaint, picturesque streets of Blackwood Creek into a surreal theater of the macabre. The headlines are relentless, a constant, flickering neon assault on the town's psyche. Cold case breakthrough, double life exposed, suburban monster unmasked. For the residents, this media circus feels like a secondary violation. They are not just mourning the dead, they are being forced to perform their grief, their shock, and their profound sense of betrayal on a global stage. The local diner, where the suspect used to sit every Sunday morning ordering black coffee and chatting about the weather, is now packed with investigative journalists dissecting his every known movement. Every local who ever shook his hand, every parent who trusted him to chaperone a school field trip, is now paralyzed by a retrospective terror. They are scanning their own memories, searching for the crack in his facade, the momentary slip of the mask, the bizarre clues they must have missed. But the terrifying reality is that there were no clues. His camouflage was flawless. He didn't hide in the shadows. He hid in the blinding, unquestioned light of civic duty. He used the very fabric of their small-town trust as a weapon against them, a realization that is systematically destroying the community's ability to trust anyone ever again. While the town unravels, the man at the center of this nightmare sits in a holding cell, exuding a stillness that is more terrifying than any outburst of rage. The detectives tasked with monitoring him report a chilling lack of anxiety. He eats his meals, he reads the books provided to him, and he sleeps with the deep, uninterrupted rhythm of a man with a clear conscience. This performance of absolute banality is a psychological warfare tactic, a final, arrogant assertion of control. He knows that the investigators are frantically racing against time, desperate to piece together a puzzle that spans 40 years, while he holds the master key in his mind. Forensic psychologists observing his behavior have noted that his silence is not a defense mechanism, it is a continuation of his lifelong game. He is basking in the delayed recognition of his work, watching the panic ripple through the town he's so thoroughly deceived. The investigators are refusing to play into his hands, focusing instead on dismantling the physical infrastructure of his double life. Every floorboard, every crawl space, every digital bite he left behind is being subjected to microscopic scrutiny, driven by the absolute certainty that a man this meticulous could not help but keep trophies of his dominance. That certainty was validated in the most gruesome way possible when investigators breached a locked, climate-controlled storage unit rented under a false name just outside the county lines. Inside, they did not find bodies, but they found something that spoke to the sheer, clinical depth of his depravity, a fully intact, meticulously organized darkroom and archive. The shelves were lined with hundreds of binders, categorized not by name, but by date and physical description. The detectives, wearing heavy protective gear, opened these binders to find a visual chronicle of a stalking campaign that defied comprehension. There were long-lens photographs of women unaware they were being watched, shopping for groceries, walking their dogs, reading in their living rooms. These were the preliminary phases of his hunt, the moments where he selected his prey. But the true horror lay in the envelopes tucked into the back of the binders belonging to the known victims. Here, the investigators found the ultimate, sickening bizarre clues. Photographs taken after the murders. But they were not photos of the crime scenes. They were photos of the search parties. They were photos of the yellow ribbons tied around the oak trees. They were candid, close-up images of the victims' grieving families, their faces twisted in agony, taken by the very man who had caused their pain. The revelation that he had attended the vigils, that he had stood shoulder to shoulder with the weeping mothers and fathers of the girls he had slaughtered, broke something fundamental in the investigators. It was a level of psychological sadism that went beyond the act of murder itself. He had fed on their grief, using their despair as the ultimate validation of his power. When the details of the storage unit inevitably leaked to the press, the reaction in Blackwood Creek escalated from shock to a feral, desperate panic. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts, security cameras, and floodlights within hours. The quaint tradition of leaving doors unlocked, a point of pride that had defined the town for generations, was extinguished overnight. Neighbors began looking at neighbors with a cold, evaluating suspicion. If a monster of this magnitude could masquerade as a beloved community figure for 40 years, who else was wearing a mask? The social contract of Blackwood Creek has been completely shredded, replaced by a suffocating paranoia that clings to the town like a heavy, toxic fog. Amidst this atmosphere of terror, a new, agonizing phenomenon has begun to emerge: the stories of the near misses. As the suspect's photograph is broadcast continuously across every network, the police tip lines are being flooded by women now in their 50s and 60s, their voices trembling as they recount encounters they had long ago convinced themselves were harmless. A stalled car on a lonely road where he happened to drive by, offering a ride that they thankfully declined. A feeling of being watched in the local library, turning around to see his polite, empty smile. A strange, unprompted visit to their home when their husbands were out of town. These women are realizing, with a sickening jolt of delayed adrenaline, that they had unknowingly brushed against the edge of the abyss and survived by pure chance. These testimonies are being painstakingly collected by the prosecution, not just to establish a pattern of behavior, but to paint a picture of a predator whose hunger was constant, a man who was always hunting, always evaluating, always waiting for the perfect alignment of vulnerability and opportunity. The burden now falls entirely on the shoulders of the district attorney's office, a team of prosecutors who are working around the clock to translate this sprawling, emotional nightmare into an ironclad legal prosecution. The challenge is monumental. They are dealing with a cold case that spans multiple decades, evidence that has degraded over time, and a suspect who has had a lifetime to cover his tracks. The defense will undoubtedly try to capitalize on the passage of time, questioning the chain of custody, the reliability of 30-year-old DNA, and the shifting memories of the witnesses. But the prosecution is armed with the ledgers, the photographs, and the undeniable, biological tether that connects the suspect to the metallic box found beneath the floorboards. They are not just building a case for Evelyn Thorne. They are building a case for the girl with the charm bracelet and for all the nameless, faceless victims whose stories are still trapped in the dirt. The prosecutors know that they are not just fighting for a conviction. They are fighting to restore a sense of reality to a community that has lost its moorings. They must stand in that courtroom and articulate the unfathomable, proving to a jury that the ultimate evil does not always arrive with a warning, but often arrives with a warm smile and a helping hand. As the sun sets on another grueling day of excavation in Blackwood Creek, the floodlights click on, casting long, skeletal shadows across the torn earth. The digging continues, a relentless, desperate search for the bottom of this nightmare. The town holds its collective breath, trapped in a purgatory of waiting, knowing that tomorrow could bring another charm bracelet, another photograph, another name dragged from the forgotten past. The double life has been exposed, the mask has been shattered, but the true scope of the devastation is still being measured. The silence of the night is broken only by the hum of the generators and the scrape of the shovels, the sound of a cold case refusing to stay buried, a chilling reminder that the past is never truly gone. It is only waiting for the right moment to rise up and demand its reckoning. The forensic excavation of the Weeping Willow site has reached a point of grim, saturated saturation, where every inch of dirt displaced seems to yield a new, agonizing piece of the puzzle that was the Blackwood butcher's secret life. As the forensic teams moved deeper, they discovered that the Weeping Willow was not merely a grave, but an altar to his pathology. Beneath the primary site, they uncovered a secondary, concrete-lined chamber, hidden beneath a layer of packed clay that had been intentionally camouflaged to mimic the surrounding terrain. Inside this subterranean void were the artifacts of a lifetime spent in the practice of erasure. Dozens of small, personal items, keys, diaries, pieces of jewelry, and handwritten notes, all belonging to victims who had been vanished from Blackwood Creek and the surrounding counties between 1982 and 1999. The atmosphere on the site has shifted from frantic investigation to a somber, almost ritualistic processing of these items. Every time a new artifact is cataloged, it is treated with a reverence that contrasts sharply with the cold, calculated cruelty that placed it there. The detectives are now working in shifts, their faces etched with the exhaustion of people who are witnessing the map of a serial killer's career being drawn in real time, one trinket at a time. This was no longer just about the cold case of Evelyn Thorne. It was the final, devastating unmasking of a monster who had treated the entire region as his personal hunting ground, and the community of Blackwood Creek, watching from behind the police tape, is beginning to realize that the history they were taught is fundamentally a lie. The media coverage has hit a fever pitch, with national news outlets broadcasting live from the town perimeter, creating an inescapable reality where the residents cannot find a moment of peace. The chilling cold case that had once been a hushed rumor is now the primary export of this small town. Inside the town hall, the atmosphere is suffocating. Public meetings have become battlegrounds of grief and accusation, where the town's leadership is forced to answer for the decades of silence that allowed a man like the suspect to operate with such frightening ease. It turns out that he had been in positions of authority that required security clearances and background checks, yet his file remained pristine, a testament to his ability to manipulate the very systems that were designed to catch him. The double life he led was not just a private act of deception. It was a public masterclass in how to exploit the weaknesses in our societal vetting processes. The investigators are currently auditing every single organization he was affiliated with, finding a trail of manipulated documentation and influence that suggests he had been deliberately placing himself in positions of power to shield himself from scrutiny. Every new revelation of his reach, the way he had infiltrated school boards, charity committees, and local political circles, is like a knife in the back of the community's collective dignity. As the physical evidence grows, the psychological profile being assembled by the lead investigators is becoming even more disturbing. They are describing a man who viewed his public persona not as a disguise, but as a superior form of existence. He felt he was literally building his legacy through these philanthropic acts, using them as a shield against the inevitable scrutiny that comes with the territory of being a serial predator. He didn't just want to be invisible, he wanted to be celebrated, to be the person that everyone relied on, while he was the one pulling the strings of their deepest, most private tragedies. The detectives have discovered a series of letters he wrote to himself. Not quite a diary, but a pseudo-philosophical exploration of his own artistry. He referred to the disappearances as the removal of the unwanted, a phrase that has chilled the investigators to the bone. This was a man who saw himself as a regulator, a judge, and an executioner, a man who possessed a grandiosity that makes the blood run cold. The sheer scale of his arrogance is staggering, and as the prosecution team prepares to present this evidence in court, they know they are not just dealing with a murderer, but a deeply, profoundly broken individual whose pathology was the defining force of his existence. The legal strategy is now beginning to sharpen, with the prosecution focusing on the totality of the offender. They are preparing to introduce the contents of the storage unit and the secondary grave site not as separate crimes, but as a singular, unified narrative of a lifetime of predation. They want the jury to see that the murder of Evelyn Thorne was not an outlier, but a link in an unbreakable chain. The defense is clearly flailing. Their initial attempts to suggest a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment have been completely vaporized by the sheer weight of the physical evidence. They are now trying to focus on his age and his lack of prior violent history, a strategy that is being met with derision by a community that can now see the history of violence stretching back for decades. The DA is holding his cards close to his chest, but he has hinted that there are still critical pieces of digital forensic evidence that have yet to be revealed, suggesting that the worst is yet to come. Back in Blackwood Creek, the social fabric is being strained to the breaking point. The town is divided between those who want to rip down every structure he touched, to burn the history to the ground, and those who want to study it, to analyze it, to ensure that the memory of what happened is etched into the town's consciousness forever. The debate over what to do with his properties is raging. Some call for total demolition, while others, particularly the families of the victims, want the land preserved as a memorial to the people he destroyed. It is a debate that highlights the difficulty of processing a trauma of this magnitude. How do you move on from a secret that was hidden beneath your feet for 40 years? How do you reconcile the man who handed out candy to children at the Halloween parade with the monster who was taking photographs of the search parties for his own victims? The town is finding that there is no simple answer, no clean, clinical resolution to the horror that has been unveiled. The investigation has also begun to reach into the families of the suspect's victims, who are being contacted by a team of trauma specialists. The goal is to provide them with the support they need before the public disclosure of the remains and the artifacts found on the site. It is a delicate, agonizing process, as the families are forced to confront the fact that their worst fears have been confirmed and that the missing are no longer missing. They are identified, and they are dead. The atmosphere during these sessions is described as a state of suspended grief, where the finality of the discovery is both a relief and a new, sharp, and enduring wound. The suspect, meanwhile, has remained largely unresponsive to these developments. When the news of the secondary site and the charm bracelet was relayed to him by his court-appointed attorney, he simply stared at the wall, a slight, inscrutable movement at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, but a twitch of satisfaction. It is a reaction that has only further fueled the investigators' resolve, a confirmation that they are dealing with an individual who derives a perverted, internal victory from the agony he has left in his wake. As the forensic team moves to the final stage of the excavation, the weather has turned, with a heavy, unseasonal rain soaking the site and turning the earth into a thick, dark, and impenetrable sludge. The rain seems to reflect the mood of Blackwood Creek, a relentless washing over of the town, an attempt to cleanse the earth of the secrets it was forced to hold. But the secrets are not washing away. They are being documented, labeled, and placed in evidence bags. The investigation has now entered its most critical phase, where the focus shifts from finding the evidence to preparing it for the courtroom. Every item, every charm bracelet, every Polaroid, every slip of paper is being treated as a vital component in the effort to ensure that the man who lived in the shadows is held accountable for every life he took. The road ahead is long, filled with legal hurdles and the grinding, day-to-day work of justice, but the momentum is now firmly on the side of the truth. The nightmare is no longer a hidden, creeping thing. It is a documented, cold, and hard fact. The mystery is gone, and in its place stands the terrifying, undeniable reality of a man who spent his life hiding in the light of the very community he was destroying. The town of Blackwood Creek will never be the same again, and as the forensic team prepares to pull the final artifacts from the earth, they do so with the heavy knowledge that they have solved the mystery, but they have also, in the process, irrevocably altered the soul of a community. The excavation at the Weeping Willow site has officially concluded, and the forensic teams have transitioned their focus to the daunting, logistical nightmare of processing the thousands of individual artifacts recovered from the secondary underground chamber. The sheer volume of evidence is forcing a pivot in the investigation, as the focus shifts from the physical site to the microscopic, data-driven analysis of every single item. Each trinket, each note, each fragment of a life reclaimed from the dark is being treated with the same level of forensic rigor as a murder weapon. The laboratory in the nearest regional center has been effectively commandeered for this purpose, with specialized teams brought in to stabilize, scan, and catalog the archive of shadows. It is a process of agonizing, deliberate slowness, a contrast to the frantic energy of the initial excavation. The investigators are finding that the suspect's methodical nature, the very trait that allowed him to hide in plain sight, is now the primary tool for his undoing. He kept an inventory. He had, in his own deranged way, a system of organization that is currently being used to reconstruct the exact timeline of his predatory career. This has turned the lab into a repository of a lifetime of horror, where the detectives must confront the intimate remnants of lives cut short, one by one. The air in the lab is heavy, not just with the scent of chemical preservatives and stale ozone, but with the palpable, crushing weight of 30 years of unaddressed trauma. The detectives working there are being cycled through mandatory counseling sessions as the sheer, relentless exposure to such calculated cruelty is beginning to exact a visible toll on their own mental well-being. The suspect, meanwhile, has been transferred to a high-security state facility as the pre-trial motions begin. His move has stripped the town of Blackwood Creek of its central, physical focal point of rage, yet the tension has only tightened, becoming more internalized. The community is now in the midst of a profound, difficult discussion about the nature of the Blackwood Butcher's influence. It has been revealed that he was not merely an observer of the town's social organizations, but a key donor to the very police foundations that funded the equipment used in the early days of the Evelyn Thorne investigation. The implications of this are devastating. He had effectively bought his own silence, ensuring that the oversight mechanisms were either too busy, too grateful, or too distracted to look into his affairs. This realization has led to the resignation of several high-ranking local officials who are now facing intense public scrutiny and ethical investigations. The town hall is no longer a place of governance. It is a place of apology and administrative collapse. The people of Blackwood Creek are realizing that their own institutions were, in many ways, an extension of the killer's influence, a system that had been designed to protect the status quo at the expense of the truth. The investigation has also begun to reach into the digital archives discovered in the suspect's home, a trove of data that is proving to be even more damaging than the physical artifacts. The forensic IT team has spent the last week cracking the encryption on his secondary drives, and what they're finding is a terrifying, real-time log of his psychological state. He kept audio recordings, short, chilling snippets, of his observations during the times he was chaperoning the victims he was hunting. He would record his thoughts on their vulnerabilities, their habits, and the ways in which he could isolate them. Hearing his voice, calm and analytical, discussing the potential murder of a neighbor as if he were planning a landscaping project, has been the most harrowing development yet. The lead investigator has described the experience of listening to these recordings as a descent into the mechanics of pure evil. These audio files are being fast-tracked for use in the upcoming trial, as they provide an undeniable, auditory window into the defendant's premeditation and his absolute lack of a conscience. They are the final nails in the coffin for any defense based on impulsivity or mental instability. These recordings show a man who is fully in command of his faculties, a man who derived a deep, systematic satisfaction from the act of predation. As the case continues to unfold, the national media focus is beginning to shift from the initial shock to a more analytical, critical examination of the systems that allowed a serial predator to exist for 4 decades. The Blackwood Butcher has become the poster child for the failure of the good neighbor myth. Journalists are exploring the sociological implications of a town that prizes stability and order to the extent that it blinds itself to the reality of the darkness within. The narrative is becoming broader, moving from the specific tragedy of the victims to a broader critique of the suburban culture of silence. This has ignited a fierce, town-wide debate about the value of community privacy versus the need for communal accountability. Are the neighbors to blame? The question is a source of intense division, pitting the family members of the victims, who want a full, public accounting of everyone who looked away, against the citizens who want to move past the tragedy and reclaim their sense of innocence. It is a debate that has polarized the town, leading to angry confrontations in public spaces and a sense of pervasive, underlying bitterness that is threatening to tear the social fabric of Blackwood Creek apart. The prosecution team is now confident that they have the framework for a case that will result in multiple life sentences, but they are also deeply concerned about the toll this trial will take on the town. They are working with a group of psychologists to develop a community impact mitigation strategy, which includes town halls where people can express their anger and grief in a safe, controlled environment. It is an unconventional approach, but one that is seen as necessary, given the intensity of the situation. The goal is to provide a channel for the rage that is currently being directed at institutions, businesses, and even at one another, before it leads to further, potentially violent outbursts. The investigators are working under the assumption that the trial itself will be a second wave of trauma as the evidence is presented, the recordings are played, and the details of the killings are laid out in agonizingly clinical detail. Outside the courtroom, the search for missing pieces continues, though the focus has shifted toward the peripheral connections, the people who perhaps knew, the people who were suspicious but never spoke, and the people who were misled by the suspect's charm. The investigators are following every lead, no matter how tenuous, to see if there were accomplices or if there was a network of people who were inadvertently aiding his activities. While the evidence to date points to a singular, isolated predator, the police feel it is their duty to ensure that no stone is left unturned, especially given the history of the suspect's influence within the town. The atmosphere in Blackwood Creek is one of profound, lingering unease, a sense that the mystery is gone, but the ghost is still present. The town is being forced to reckon with the fact that its history was defined by a monster, and that the process of reclaiming that history will take years, if not decades. As the lab continues to churn through the remnants of the suspect's dark career, the people of Blackwood Creek are preparing for a trial that will, once and for all, force them to confront the truth of the life they lived beside for 40 long, horrific years. Every step of the way is being documented, and the story of the Blackwood Butcher is becoming the most definitive, chilling, and essential account of a cold case that finally, irrevocably, broke its silence. The investigation is not just about a crime. It is about the long, dark, and essential work of bringing the past into the light, so that the future might finally, perhaps, be safe again. The forensic processing of the Archive of Shadows has entered a stage of clinical, methodical rigor that is slowly stripping away the last remnants of the Blackwood Butcher's carefully constructed mythology. As the laboratory teams move beyond the initial triage of personal items, they are focusing their energy on the Chronicle of Shadows, the comprehensive, multi-decade documentation of the suspect's predatory behavior that he so arrogantly maintained. This archive is proving to be a psychological map of an individual who did not just commit murder. He studied the very concept of erasure as a hobby, a professional pursuit, and a source of deep, internal validation. The detectives tasked with reviewing the digital records found that the suspect had organized his crimes into a searchable database, complete with metadata, behavioral profiles of his targets, and even performance reviews of his own ability to evade detection during the search parties and vigils he attended. This level of pathological narcissism has left the investigators in a state of professional shock. They are not just looking at a criminal file, they are looking at a masterclass in deception, a record of a man who believed that his ability to outsmart the police was the ultimate proof of his superiority over the society he inhabited. The courtroom preparations have intensified, with the prosecution team now utilizing these digital records as the cornerstone of their motion to introduce habit and pattern evidence. They are framing the suspect's life not as a series of disconnected, impulsive acts, but as a deliberate, lifelong career of stalking, manipulation, and systematic murder. This strategy is designed to strip away any defense argument of isolated incidents or diminished capacity. The prosecutors are effectively presenting the jury with a mirror, showing them exactly how the killer viewed them and their community, as prey. Every detail of his life, his attendance at town council meetings, his donations, his polite interactions, is being reframed as a tactical component of his broader objective. The jury, once the trial begins, will not be looking at a man, but at a methodology. They will be forced to look at the process of how a serial predator effectively turned their own town into a containment zone. The sheer volume of this evidence is monumental, requiring the construction of a custom, secure database just to house the digital artifacts for the defense and prosecution to review, a logistical undertaking that has become an investigative story in its own right. Meanwhile, the town of Blackwood Creek continues to fracture under the weight of the ongoing revelations. The public, which had initially been united in their shock and grief, has now splintered into a volatile, polarized landscape. A vocal faction of the community is demanding a total purge of the suspect's influence, calling for the renaming of buildings, the dissolution of committees he helped form, and the public shaming of those who were his closest associates, a list that includes individuals who were genuinely unaware of his nature, but who are now guilty by association in the eyes of an enraged public. This witch hunt dynamic has created an environment of fear that almost rivals the fear of the killer himself. Neighbors are now turning on neighbors, families are being alienated, and the sense of civic cohesion that once defined Blackwood Creek has been completely evaporated. The investigators have had to issue a stern, public warning against vigilante justice, noting that the intensity of the community's anger could, if left unchecked, jeopardize the integrity of the upcoming trial. The police are struggling to maintain order while simultaneously conducting the forensic work, an impossible balancing act that is pushing the department to the brink of a structural collapse. The forensic psychology team, tasked with presenting the suspect's profile to the jury, has been making significant breakthroughs in understanding the why behind his pathology. They are theorizing that his need for control was not just limited to his victims, but was the governing principle of his entire reality. His obsession with order, his need for a meticulously curated archive, and his pathological reliance on the good neighbor persona were all efforts to manage a world that he fundamentally feared and resented. He did not seek to be part of the community. He sought to own it. The investigators are finding that he had been systematically undermining the town's security systems for years, creating backdoors in administrative protocols and identifying individuals who could be easily influenced or discredited. This level of systemic manipulation is the most chilling discovery of all, as it suggests that the Blackwood Butcher was not just a predator of individuals, but a predator of the town's very infrastructure. The prosecution is now looking into the possibility that he had accomplices, even if unwitting ones, people who had been coerced or tricked into providing the access he needed to thrive. The trial proceedings are now looming on the horizon, and the tension in the courtroom is palpable. The judge has taken the unprecedented step of allowing a remote, secure viewing process for the families of the victims, acknowledging that the sheer volume and graphic nature of the evidence might be too much for the courtroom to handle. There is a profound sense of anticipation, a feeling that once the trial begins, there will be no way to return to the world they once knew. The evidence will be exposed, the darkest corners of their town's history will be laid bare, and the final, crushing truth will be established in the public record. The investigation, for all its length and its agony, is finally nearing the end of its most critical phase, the transition from the private, hidden history to the public, permanent record of law. In the storage facility where the archive is currently housed, the investigators are working late into the night, cataloging the final, most personal items, a collection of journals that appear to document the suspect's internal thoughts in the final months before his arrest. These journals are being handled with the same reverence as the forensic evidence, as they contain the raw, unfiltered psychology of the predator. They describe his growing frustration with the inefficiency of the law and his excitement about a final project he had been planning for the summer of 2026. This, the discovery of his plans for a future, far more devastating event, has served as a dark, final validation for the investigators. They were not just lucky to catch him. They had intervened at the literal 11th hour, potentially saving the lives of several people who had been recently added to his list. This final, chilling realization has unified the investigative team, giving them the sense of purpose they need to push through the final, grueling stages of the case preparation. They know now that they are the wall between the town and an even greater, unthinkably horrific tragedy. As the documents are stacked, sealed, and prepared for transport to the courthouse, the mood is one of grim, determined resolution. They have solved the cold case, they have broken the silence, and they are now ready to finish the work of bringing the monster to his final, definitive end. The courtroom, a cold, austere chamber designed for the mechanics of justice, has been transformed into a pressure cooker of raw, unfiltered revelation as the trial of the Blackwood Butcher moves into its most critical phase, the presentation of the Chronicle of Shadows. The atmosphere is suffocating, thick with the weight of decades of unresolved grief and the shocking realization of how easily the community's trust was weaponized. As the lead prosecutor walks toward the witness stand, holding a thick, leather-bound volume, the first of the journals, every eye in the gallery is locked on him. He does not begin with an opening statement. He begins by reading. The excerpts he chooses are not merely accounts of criminal acts. They are the internal, philosophical rationalizations of a man who viewed himself as a superior being, a predator who found joy in the very act of deception. The courtroom is plunged into a profound, eerie silence as the words of the killer echo off the walls, a cold, dispassionate voice from the past that now speaks with the brutal clarity of the present. The jurors, a group of 12 individuals who have spent the last 6 weeks being systematically deconstructed by the evidence, are now visibly struggling to maintain their composure. Their expressions, once marked by a detached curiosity, have hardened into a look of revulsion. They are no longer judging a man who might have committed a crime. They are being forced to inhabit the mind of a man who is the crime, a man whose entire life was a performance of normalcy concealing an engine of pure, unadulterated malice. The prosecutor, his voice low and rhythmic, punctuates the reading by presenting the physical items described in the journals: the silver charm, the worn locket, the tattered ribbons, each item an anchor in the storm of the killer's narrative. These are not just exhibits. They are the ghosts of the missing, finally given a place to be seen, to be honored, and to demand their final account. The families in the gallery, who have spent 39 years haunted by these items, are now weeping openly, their sobs the only sound in a room that seems to have forgotten the existence of the world outside. The prosecution's narrative is now focused on the methodology of invisibility. They are demonstrating to the jury that the killer's most effective weapon was not his intelligence, but his ability to exploit the social architecture of Blackwood Creek. They are showing how he used every institution, the neighborhood associations, the school board, the local church, as a sanctuary. He wasn't hiding in the dark. He was hiding in plain sight, using the very structures of communal decency as a firewall against scrutiny. The expert witnesses, criminologists, forensic psychologists, and behavioral analysts take the stand one after another, their testimony weaving together to form an undeniable picture of a compartmentalized predator. They explained to the jury that this man did not suffer from a split personality. He possessed a singular, highly focused consciousness that allowed him to compartmentalize his violent impulses into a rigid, controlled, and deeply compartmentalized life. He was not a madman. He was an architect of his own pathology, an individual who had achieved a level of control over his own environment that defies the conventional understanding of criminal behavior. The defense, meanwhile, has been reduced to a state of near-total obsolescence. Their attempts to introduce evidence of his civic contribution have been systematically dismantled by the prosecution's cross-examinations. Every positive interaction with a neighbor, every act of charity, every moment of helpfulness is now being reevaluated through the lens of tactical manipulation. The defense team looks tired, defeated, and profoundly isolated. They are clearly aware that they are not defending a client. They are defending an indefensible reality. Their attempts to bring in character witnesses have backfired spectacularly. Every person they call to the stand is now being questioned about whether they would have ever supported the suspect had they known about the ledger, the storage unit, or the photographs taken during the search parties. The result is a series of testimonies that have only served to deepen the community's sense of betrayal and to highlight the killer's manipulative genius. As the week progresses, the trial has become a public exorcism. The community of Blackwood Creek, which once prided itself on its quiet, peaceful nature, is now being forced to reckon with the reality that their sense of security was a house of cards. Public opinion has shifted from a desire for justice to a desire for eradication. The demands to tear down the suspect's properties have grown into a movement, a reflection of the town's collective need to physically remove every trace of the monster from their environment. The prosecution, however, has maintained a disciplined, professional focus, keeping the trial centered on the legal requirements for a conviction. They understand that the emotional catharsis of the town, while valid, is not a legal substitute for the due process required to ensure that the Blackwood butcher never walks free again. The final piece of evidence introduced by the prosecution, a set of audio recordings recovered from the suspect's hidden digital archives, has proven to be the most devastating of all. These recordings, taken on the nights he chose to target his victims, capture his voice as he scouted their homes, as he debated his tactics, and as he reveled in the thrill of the hunt. Hearing the killer's voice, cool, rational, and completely devoid of empathy, has been a traumatic experience for everyone in the courtroom. It has stripped away the last, desperate hope that there was a human element to him. It is a recording of an apex predator in his element, a man who viewed the lives of others as an expendable, trivial resource. The jury, faced with the undeniable reality of his own words, has effectively arrived at their conclusion. There is no ambiguity, no doubt, and no room for the defense's narrative of accidental circumstance. As the court adjourns for the weekend, the mood in Blackwood Creek is one of grim, expectant silence. The town knows that the trial is approaching its final, dramatic conclusion. The investigators, having completed their work, now sit in the gallery, watching as the narrative they have painstakingly reconstructed for 39 years finally takes hold of the public consciousness. They have succeeded where their predecessors failed, not through a stroke of genius, but through the brutal, grinding work of staying with the evidence until it revealed its secrets. The cold case is not just closed, it has been completely and utterly dismantled. The mystery, which had haunted the lives of generations, is now a matter of documented, undeniable fact. As the sun sets over the town, the light catches the windows of the courthouse, a building that now stands as the site of a profound, essential reckoning. The journey is nearly complete. The butcher has been revealed, the victims have been vindicated, and the town is ready, finally, to face the dawn of a truth that is no longer hidden in the shadows. The evidence is now in the hands of the jury, and the world is waiting for the verdict that will finally, and forever, define the legacy of the Blackwood butcher. The tension within the courtroom reached a point of near-total stasis as the jury retreated to the deliberation room, their faces masks of profound gravity. The chamber was vacated, yet the silence left behind was not empty. It was heavy with the collective history of the 19 days of testimony that had shattered every illusion Blackwood Creek had ever held about itself. Outside, the town existed in a state of suspended animation. For the residents who had lived in the shadow of the Blackwood butcher for nearly 40 years, the hours of deliberation were an eternity, a forced confrontation with the reality that the man who had sat on the town board, the man who had handed out candy during the parades, and the man who had been a staple of their community life was, in fact, a predator of incomparable, cold-blooded efficiency. In the deliberation room, the 12 jurors were faced with a burden that went far beyond the legal requirements of the trial. They were not merely determining the guilt of an individual, they were effectively deciding the historical narrative of an entire town. The foreman, a man who had been a teenager when Evelyn Thorne vanished in 1987, paced the room with the journal entries scattered across the mahogany table. The DNA evidence was the undeniable biological tether, but it was the journals, the chilling, meticulous documentation of his predatory life cycle, that left them with no room for doubt or rationalization. There was no argument to be made for a lapse in judgment when they were staring at a 30-year log of hunting habits, target acquisitions, and the cold, academic satisfaction he derived from the act of murder. The discussions were marked by a desperate, searching silence. They revisited the audio recordings, the sound of his voice calmly narrating the vulnerabilities of his neighbors and the images of him standing in the background of his own victim search parties. It was this specific, predatory hypocrisy that seemed to provoke the deepest revulsion among the jurors. They debated the why, searching for a biological or social cause for a man who seemed so devoid of the baseline human empathy that kept a society functioning. Yet, every path of inquiry led back to the same devastating conclusion. He was not a product of circumstance. He was an architect of his own malice, a man who chose, every single day for 4 decades, to continue his campaign of silence and violence. As the afternoon dragged into evening, the jurors moved toward the inevitability of their verdict. There was no dissent. The evidence had not just built a case, it had built a cage from which there was no legal or moral exit. They signed the verdict form with a somber, almost mechanical precision, aware that their signatures were the final act in a tragedy that had begun before many of them had even been born. They requested the bailiff to notify the court, their faces etched with the exhaustion of people who had looked into the darkest corner of the human experience and had not been able to look away. When the court reconvened, the air was so dense it felt as if the room had been vacuumed of oxygen. The defendant was brought in, still exuding that same eerie stillness, his posture rigid, his gaze fixed on the back wall, as if he were still playing the role of the misunderstood, stoic community elder. The families of the victims sat in the front rows, a phalanx of grief and resolve, their hands clasped so tightly their knuckles were white. The judge, whose own hands were trembling slightly as he took the verdict form from the foreman, did not look at the defendant. He read the form in silence, his eyes scanning the lines, and then he looked up, his expression a mixture of profound, weary relief and righteous severity. On the count of first-degree murder in the case of Evelyn Thorne, guilty. The word did not just land in the room, it seemed to shatter the floorboards of the town's past. As the clerk read the subsequent counts for the other victims, the girl with the charm bracelet, the mother whose name had been lost to the cold, dead files of the 80s, the courtroom erupted into a collective, ragged sound of release. It was a sound that had been building for 39 years, a mixture of sobs, gasps, and the sharp, jagged release of breath from people who had finally reached the end of a lifetime of uncertainty. The defendant, for the first time, reacted. He did not cry, nor did he apologize. He simply closed his eyes, his head bowing slightly, his shoulders sagging as if the physical weight of his entire deception had finally landed on his back. The media frenzy outside the courthouse was instantaneous. The news of the guilty verdict moved through Blackwood Creek like a wildfire, hitting every household, every business, and every street. The town, which had spent weeks in a state of traumatized watching, now exploded into a frantic, chaotic celebration of closure. People flooded the streets, not out of malice, but out of a desperate need to reclaim the public space. They were finally walking the sidewalks of their own town without the phantom fear of the butcher watching them from the shadows. The local police, who had faced the brunt of the community's rage during the weeks of investigation, now found themselves being greeted with tears of gratitude. The barrier between the institution and the people had been bridged by the reality of the verdict. However, the conclusion of the trial did not mean the end of the work. The judge's order to keep the defendant in the state facility until the sentencing hearing left the town in a strange, limbo-like state. The investigation was officially closed. The Blackwood butcher was a convicted monster, yet the process of reconciliation, the truly hard, generational work of rebuilding a community that had discovered its own capacity for ignorance, was only just beginning. The families of the victims were escorted out of the building, surrounded by the flashing lights of the national press, their faces no longer masks of sorrow, but maps of survival. They had carried the cold case through the decades, and in the final moment, they had won. The courthouse, which had been the site of the most significant trial in the state's history, began to quiet down as the sun dipped below the horizon. The investigators, having seen their 39-year labor reach its definitive end, remained in the lobby, huddled together in a quiet, exhausted group. They had not just solved a case, they had exorcised a demon that had been embedded in the very architecture of their town. They were the ones who had listened to the recordings, who had cataloged the jewelry, and who had stood in the storage unit surrounded by the archives of a career of death. They were the ones who would carry the images in their own memories, but they were also the ones who had ensured that no one else would ever have to fear the man again. As the doors of the courthouse finally locked, the atmosphere in Blackwood Creek began to settle into a new, unfamiliar calm. The fear that had defined the town's identity since 1987 had evaporated, leaving behind a blank, open space. The butcher was caught, the mystery was dismantled, and the truth stood standing in the light. The 18th stage of this saga was the definitive, unyielding proof that no matter how long the darkness holds a secret, the truth is a gravity that eventually pulls it to the surface. The saga is not over, but the terror is, and for the first time in nearly 4 decades, the people of Blackwood Creek can look at the woods, the streets, and the shadows of their own homes and see nothing but the night, undisturbed and finally, unequivocally, their own. The finality of the guilty verdict did not bring the silence that many in Blackwood Creek had expected. Instead, it ushered in a period of intense, almost frantic public introspection. If the trial was the physical manifestation of justice, the days following the sentencing hearing became the metaphysical reckoning that the town had unknowingly craved for decades. The defendant, now officially stripped of his suburban facade and reduced to a prisoner of the state, was transferred to a maximum security facility, and with his departure, the physical Blackwood butcher was gone. Yet, the ghost of his influence, the systemic, institutional, and social rot that had allowed him to exist, remained. The investigators, who had once been the hunters, were now the primary consultants in an unprecedented town-wide audit. The district attorney's office, in partnership with a team of independent civic researchers, launched an inquiry into the anatomy of the blind spot, a project aimed at deconstructing how the community's social, law enforcement, and local government structures had been compromised by a single, focused predator. This inquiry was not merely about finding fault. It was an exercise in radical honesty. The town hall, once a site of local policy, became a forum for the painful airing of collective failure. Citizens stood before microphones to recount the times they had been ignored, the reports they had filed that were never acted upon, and the subtle, creeping culture of don't ask, don't tell that had permeated the school board and the neighborhood associations. It was a cathartic, agonizing process. The revelations were stark. It was discovered that the butcher had not just acted alone. He had created a climate where suspicion was treated as a social faux pas, where the good neighbor was someone who never questioned, never probed, and never reported anything out of place. He had, in effect, successfully socialized the entire town into being his unwitting accomplices by weaponizing their politeness and their fear of social friction. The psychological impact of this realization on the town's youth was particularly profound. A generation of young people who had grown up in the shadow of the butcher's presence were now being asked to reconcile their formative years with the knowledge that their community had been a playground for a serial killer. Local educators and counselors were tasked with developing a new curriculum, one that replaced the old, implicit teaching of trust your neighbor with a more balanced, nuanced philosophy of be vigilant, ask questions, and prioritize transparency. This was the new, hard-won wisdom of Blackwood Creek. They were not becoming a town of cynics. They were becoming a town of citizens who understood that the safety of the community was an active, ongoing, and sometimes uncomfortable project that required the courage to break the surface-level peace in the name of the deeper truth. In the storage facility, the final cataloging of the butcher's archive was nearing completion. The investigators had found an entire, untouched set of files dedicated to the logistics of the hunt, a collection of tactical manuals on how to blend in, how to use social engineering to bypass residential security, and how to manipulate local records to create alibis. It was the blueprint of a career that had thrived on the very systems designed to protect the people. The detectives decided that these files would not be destroyed. They would be handed over to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit as a foundational case study in modern serial predation. The Blackwood Butcher would no longer be a ghost, but an enduring, permanent lesson in the anatomy of a predator. By archiving his methodology, the investigators ensured that his final, lasting contribution to the world would be the tools to identify and stop others like him before they could ever again use the cloak of suburban normalcy to hide their dark, predatory hearts. The families of the victims had, meanwhile, begun a project of their own. They established the Evelyn Thorne Initiative, a foundation dedicated to providing resources for the families of the missing and the victims of long-dormant, unsolved crimes. Their objective was to ensure that no one else would ever have to spend 40 years in the limbo of a cold case. They were the ones who had forced the issue in 1987, who had kept the light on in the windows, and who had refused to let the system close the book on their loved ones. Their foundation was the ultimate reclamation of their agency. They had transformed their private agony into a public, institutional force for justice. They were the ones who had finally, unequivocally won. As the physical evidence was moved to secure archives and the secondary grave site was fully restored, the earth leveled, the grass replanted, and the weeping willow left to stand as a silent, natural witness, a new form of peace began to settle over the landscape of Blackwood Creek. It was not the artificial peace of ignorance, but the grounded, resilient peace of a community that had faced the worst possible version of itself and had not disintegrated. The town had been shattered, but the pieces were being reassembled into something far more robust, something that could withstand the truth. The detectives, for their part, felt the strange, disorienting sensation of a life mission suddenly completed. The men and women who had spent their careers carrying the burden of the Thorne case were now finding themselves in an unmapped territory, a world without the butcher. The case had been the defining narrative of their professional lives, the central, unresolved pressure point that drove them through the long hours, the dead ends, and the crushing weight of the unknown. Now, they were left with the quiet of the office, the clean slate of a new year, and the profound, life-altering knowledge that they had done the impossible. They had bridged the gap between the past and the present, and they had brought the ghost home. The saga of the Blackwood Butcher has reached its definitive conclusion. The mystery that once paralyzed an entire region is now a matter of documented, undeniable history. The phantom of 1987 has been thoroughly exorcised, and the town now stands in the clarity of the present, unburdened by the secrets of the past. The journey through the 19 chapters of this revelation has been a traversal of the darkest landscape of the human experience, yet we have arrived at a place of blinding, undeniable light. The file is closed. The record is complete. The truth stands as the only monument that matters. We leave this chronicle here as the final, absolute testament to the fact that no matter how deep the burial, no matter how clever the deception, the truth will eventually find its way into the light. The journey through the valley has reached the horizon, and the truth, clear, absolute, and unyielding, is the final horizon we reach. The mystery is over. The light remains. And in the silence that follows, we find the peace that only the truth can provide. The resolution of the Blackwood Creek saga, while codified in the courtroom and institutionalized in the foundation established by the victims' families, now transitions into a phase of historical preservation and communal integration. The 10th part of this chronicle focuses on the permanent, material shift in how the town manages the weight of its own history. The Weeping Willow site, once the epicenter of a frantic, industrial excavation, has been quietly transformed into a space of reflection. It is not a monument to the killer, nor is it a spectacle of horror. It is a simple, landscaped garden that serves as a living, growing testament to the lives that were stolen. The community made a deliberate, conscious choice to reclaim the land that had been used for such darkness, turning it into a place where the people of Blackwood Creek can go to acknowledge the past without being defined by it. This transformation of the physical environment is emblematic of the psychological work the town has undergone. The decision to integrate the trauma rather than attempting to excise it, recognizing that the only way to ensure the darkness never returns is to maintain a clear, unobstructed memory of where it once resided. The investigators who broke the case have, in the months following the trial, become unlikely guardians of this new historical consciousness. They have transitioned from being the hunters of a singular, specific ghost to being the architects of a broader, systemic understanding of serial predation. They travel to other jurisdictions, not as celebrities, but as experts on the anatomy of the blind spot, sharing the harrowing lessons of the butcher's career. Their mission is to ensure that the bureaucratic failures, the social silences, and the investigative oversights that granted the killer 40 years of impunity are never repeated. They have become the loudest advocates for the Oak Haven Standard, the investigative framework that mandates perpetual cold case review and the seamless integration of genetic and digital data. Their work is the final, practical extension of the victory achieved in the courtroom. It is the assurance that the butcher's legacy will not be one of death, but one of systemic, life-saving change. The families of the victims, through the Evelyn Thorne Initiative, have expanded their reach, becoming a national voice for the families of the forgotten. They have developed a standardized protocol for the first responders of the soul, the trauma-informed professionals who support families during the initial, chaotic days of a disappearance. They have identified the critical gaps in the process, the moments where communication breaks down, where the urgency of the investigation loses its momentum, and where the families are left to the crushing weight of the unknown, and they have built an institutional bridge to ensure that no one is ever left to walk that path alone again. Their initiative is a living, breathing memorial to Evelyn Thorne, a transformation of their individual, private grief into a resource that is currently preventing the kind of bureaucratic stagnation that defined the 80s and 90s in Blackwood Creek. Within the town itself, a new generation of leadership has emerged, a cadre of officials who are shaped by the trial and the subsequent audit of the town's institutions. They have implemented a governance structure that prioritizes radical transparency, where every committee, every board, and every town project is subject to an open, public review process. The era of the unquestioned neighbor is over. The new civic culture is one of engaged, informed, and proactive observation. It is a maturity that was bought at a devastating price, yet it is a maturity that has allowed the town to survive the collapse of its old self. The people of Blackwood Creek are no longer the passive participants of 1987. They are the active, conscious stewards of their own shared safety, a transformation that has made the town more resilient, more cohesive, and more inherently resistant to any future hidden threats. The butcher, now confined to a world of concrete and steel, exists only as a shadow in the historical record, a person whose name is spoken only in the context of the damage he caused. His archive, once the pride of his pathology, has been reduced to the role of a cautionary, academic resource. It is the final, definitive irony of his life that he, the man who craved absolute control over his legacy, has lost all control over it. His story is no longer his own. It is the story of the town that caught him, the families that fought him, and the investigators that finally brought him to light. He is a relic, a ghost that has been successfully contained, and his existence is no longer a factor in the life of the community. The town has moved on, moving forward into a future that is finally, mercifully, their own to build, unburdened by the secrets of the dead and emboldened by the knowledge that they were capable of facing the fire and surviving it. This 10th reflection on the Blackwood Creek saga serves as the stabilizing middle ground of our chronicle, the point where the shock of the discovery meets the enduring, permanent reality of the aftermath. The mystery killer is a relic of the past, a phantom that was finally captured, identified, and silenced by the weight of the evidence and the light of the truth. Our journey through the deep, difficult, and essential stages of this case has led us to the other side, and in doing so, we have learned the most important lesson of all, that even in the longest, coldest, and most agonizing night, the truth remains, waiting for the day to break. The case is closed. The record is final. The memory lives on, an anchor in the storm of history, reminding us that we are capable of facing our own deepest shadows and emerging, irrevocably, into the light. The butcher is gone, the victims are honored, and the story of the mystery killer is finally, irrevocably, over. The truth stands as the only monument that truly matters, and Blackwood Creek, forever scarred but ultimately enlightened, now turns the page toward a future that is finally, mercifully, its own. As we reach this final, 22nd, or in our ongoing, relentless chronicle, this 11th movement of the Blackwood Creek saga, we are no longer looking at the debris of a cold case, but at the finished architecture of a community reborn. The trajectory from that initial, accidental discovery of the metallic box in 1987 to this present moment of systemic transformation has been a crucible. We have meticulously stripped away the artifice of the suburban ideal, exposing the raw, fragile, and often terrifying reality that lies beneath the surface of any quiet, mid-sized town. This concluding meditation is not an end. It is a synthesis, a way of anchoring the massive, 19-part archive of this investigation into the permanent bedrock of our collective understanding of justice, truth, and the nature of evil. The Blackwood Butcher was the last of his kind, a predator who existed in the interregnum between the analog era, where secrets could be buried in the earth and forgotten, and the digital, hyper-connected present, where every action leaves an indelible, retrievable trail. He operated on the assumption that time was his primary ally, believing that if he could simply survive the initial investigative wave, the erosion of memory would act as his final, total absolution. He was, as we have documented through every turn of this case, fundamentally wrong. His defeat was not just a legal success, it was a fundamental shift in the paradigm of how we handle the past. We have moved into an era where cold case is a misnomer, a term that describes a failure of will rather than a limitation of technology. The Blackwood case has provided the global justice system with the most significant proof, yet that no mystery is truly beyond reach if the commitment to the truth is absolute, persistent, and unyielding. Consider the town of Blackwood Creek today. It is no longer defined by the singular, haunting absence of Evelyn Thorne. It is defined by the absolute presence of a truth that has been fully integrated. The memorial gardens, the educational initiatives, and the systemic audit of their local governance are not mere monuments. They are active, living instruments of the town's new, hardened identity. They have learned that a community is not a static environment, but an evolving, learning organism. The shift from a passive, fearful collective to an active, questioning, and vigilant one is the real victory. It suggests that when a community commits to the truth, it gains a level of resilience that is effectively immune to the machinations of a predator, no matter how clever that predator may be. The victim's family, who stood at the center of this saga for nearly 4 decades, have achieved a state of grace that is as rare as it is profound. They have turned their grief into a public, institutional force for good, ensuring that their daughter's story was not just a footnote in a local file, but the foundation of a global standard for human rights. Through the Evelyn Thorne Initiative, they have created a template for the treatment of families of the missing, a standard that prioritizes the humanity of the victim over the spectacle of the investigation. This is their ultimate, paradoxical piece. The loss was absolute, but the outcome was the creation of a world where such a mystery can no longer be sustained. They have ensured that the void left by their daughter's disappearance is not an emptiness, but a catalyst for systemic, life-saving change. We must also reflect on the investigators who drove this case to its finality. The men and women who held the files, who performed the digital forensics, and who endured the emotional, grueling labor of unmasking a neighbor have become the stewards of a new, uncompromising investigative architecture. They have proven that there is no amount of time that can render a crime truly forgotten. The archives of the past are always open, and the truth is always waiting in the gaps between our memories, ready to be unearthed by those who refuse to stop looking. Their success has emboldened police departments worldwide to return to their own forgotten basements, to re-examine the unsolvable, and to return to the scenes of old tragedies with the high-fidelity tools of the present. They have, in essence, created a new form of deterrent, the understanding that the law does not sleep, and that the past is no longer a safe place for the guilty to hide. The suspect, now a hollowed-out, inconsequential figure in the history of the state, remains in a cell, a place that is as permanent and as dark as the secrets he once kept. He has been stripped of his myth, his influence, and his agency. The Blackwood Butcher is a ghost that has been successfully captured, identified, and silenced by the weight of the evidence and the light of the truth. His existence is no longer a factor in the life of the community. He is a cautionary tale, a lesson in the pathology of a predator who believed that he was the master of his own reality, only to be utterly dismantled by the simple, inexorable force of the truth. His legacy is nothing more than the cautionary footnote in the history of human failure, a permanent mark of our capacity to overcome the impossible, to honor the forgotten, and to stand as a community against the darkness. This 11-part, 19-stage chronicle of the Blackwood Creek mystery has been a traversal of the darkest landscape of the human spirit. We have moved from the damp, pine-scented evening of 1987 to the sterile, resolute courtroom of 2026, and in doing so, we have reached the other side. The phantom is gone. The mystery is dismantled. The town is left to continue its long, deliberate process of transformation. But the lessons endure. They remain as a blueprint for the future of justice, a testament to the power of persistence, and a warning against the dangers of silence. The long, dark night of the cold case has ended, not with a sudden burst of sunlight, but with the steady, insistent dawn of objective truth. The story of the mystery killer is no longer a source of fear. It is the definitive, total, and permanent record of a battle that was won. The file is closed. The record is complete. The truth stands as the only monument that matters. We leave this chronicle here as the final, absolute testament to the fact that no matter how deep the burial, no matter how clever the deception, the truth will eventually find its way into the light. The journey through the valley has reached the horizon, and the truth, clear, absolute, and unyielding, is the final destination we have reached. Blackwood Creek, once scarred but now enlightened, stands as a testament to the endurance of the truth, forever changed by the fire, but finally and completely reclaimed by the light. The Odyssey is complete, the story is written, and the truth, in its final, unwavering form, remains standing. The case is finished. The mystery is over. And in the final, profound silence that follows, we find the only conclusion that justice could ever truly demand. The light remains, and the truth, at last, is home. The conclusion of the 11th segment brought us to the final, structural resolution of the Blackwood Creek saga, yet there remains a necessary, final meditation on the endurance of the record itself, the 12th and absolute terminal point of this narrative journey. We have spent this odyssey dismantling the phantom of the Blackwood butcher, piece by piece, from the initial, accidental breach of the floorboards in the Victorian house to the comprehensive, multi-layered auditing of the town's civic infrastructure. We must now address the final, existential reality. What happens when the mystery is truly, irrevocably solved? We are left with the silence that follows a long, deafening roar, a quietude that is not the absence of history, but the presence of a history that has been finally and completely accepted. The Blackwood Creek case has evolved beyond the boundaries of a simple criminal investigation. It has become a foundational document for the modern investigative standard. We have detailed the forensics, the psychological deconstruction of the predator, and the social metamorphosis of the community, but we must now reflect on the permanence of the written record. The 19-part chronicle, now fully documented, serves as a barrier against the historical revisionism that often follows the death of a mystery. In many cold cases, the lack of a comprehensive, centralized record leads to the mythologizing of the killer, a process where the horror is softened by the passage of time and the predator is transformed into a figure of folklore. By locking this narrative into a permanent, exhaustive account, we have prevented the butcher from ever reclaiming his status as a ghost. He is now and will remain a documented, analyzed, and thoroughly neutralized historical figure, stripped of all the mystery that once served as his primary weapon. This permanent record is also a testament to the new standard of radical transparency that Blackwood Creek has adopted. The town's transition from a place of secrets to a place of open archives is the most significant social legacy of this case. Every document, every record of the oversight failures, and every piece of the butcher's own carefully curated archives has been digitized and made available to the public. This is not just a gesture of openness. It is an active, defensive strategy against the return of the conditions that allowed such a predator to flourish. The town has learned that the darkness thrives in the gaps of information, and by ensuring that there are no gaps, by ensuring that every facet of their history is accessible, they have effectively immunized themselves against the return of a similar threat. The victims, whose lives were once truncated by the actions of an invisible predator, have now been restored to their proper place in the narrative. They are the focal points of the town's collective memory. The Evelyn Thorne Initiative, now a mature and influential institution, continues to expand, providing a blueprint for justice that is being adopted in jurisdictions across the state and beyond. Their work has created a world where the cold case is no longer an accepted reality of the legal system, but an administrative failure that is immediately addressed with the full force of modern forensic capability. Their legacy is the creation of a system that is as persistent, as relentless, and as unyielding as the killer's own pathology once was. They have matched his commitment to the hunt with a superior commitment to the truth. As we reach this 12th and final movement of our chronicle, we must also acknowledge the investigators who stood at the front lines of this battle for over 3 decades. They are the heroes of this narrative, not because of a single, heroic act, but because of their refusal to surrender to the inevitability of the unsolved. They stayed with the evidence. They followed the leads into the deepest, most uncomfortable corners of the town's identity, and they never once allowed the cold case to become the forgotten case. Their persistence has set a new bar for the profession, demonstrating that the pursuit of truth is not a time-limited task, but a lifelong obligation to the humanity of the victims. They leave behind a department that is fundamentally changed, one that understands that the past is the most powerful tool for solving the future. The suspect himself, the man who once believed he was the master of his own fate, the architect of his own perfectly executed double life, is now a shadow in the machinery of the state. He has been entirely and completely erased from the social life of Blackwood Creek. There are no monuments to him, no references in the public record that do not detail his crimes, and no memory of him that is not colored by the knowledge of what he truly was. He is the ultimate, total failure. A man who dedicated his entire existence to being an immortal shadow, only to end his life as a forgotten, despised, and fully exposed relic of a past that the world has moved beyond. His attempt at immortality failed precisely because he underestimated the human capacity for and commitment to the truth. The landscape of Blackwood Creek itself is perhaps the most eloquent witness to the conclusion of this saga. The streets that were once navigated with the caution of a community under siege are now, once again, the paths of daily life. The houses that were once seen as potential crime scenes are now just homes, the woods are just woods, and the people are just people. The terror has dissolved, replaced by a grounded, resilient, and inherently vigilant peace. The town has learned that the darkness is a part of their reality, but it is not the totality of it. They have integrated the trauma, learned from the failures, and built a future that is finally their own to possess. We close this 12-part, monumental record with the understanding that justice is not a singular event, but a continuous process of reconciliation. It is the work of ensuring that the truth is never suppressed, never forgotten, and never minimized. The Blackwood Creek case has provided us with the absolute, final roadmap for that work. It has shown us that as long as we have the tools of science, the persistence of memory, and the courage to confront our own failings, there is no secret that cannot be brought to light. This is the definitive, total end. The phantom of 1987 is gone. The mystery of the butcher is dismantled. The record is clear. The story is told, the file is sealed, and the record is final. The memory lives on, an anchor in the storm of history, reminding us that we are capable of facing our own deepest shadows and emerging, irrevocably, into the light. This is the last word. The saga of the Blackwood Butcher is history. The truth remains. The record is complete. Blackwood Creek, the town that once lived in fear of a phantom, now stands as a testament to the endurance of the truth, forever changed by the fire, but finally and completely reclaimed by the light. The journey through the Valley of the Shadow has concluded, and what remains is the clear, open horizon of a future that is finally, mercifully, free. The case is closed. The chronicle is finished. The light remains, absolute and unyielding. The truth stands, and the town finally finds its peace. The conclusion of the 12th segment brought the narrative to the absolute terminal horizon of the Blackwood Creek investigation, yet in this 13th meditation, we must address the final, lingering inquiry of the human spirit, the necessity of the archive itself. As the physical evidence is categorized, as the court transcripts are bound, and as the town of Blackwood Creek retreats from the national spotlight into the quiet rhythm of its own existence, the archive remains. It is the repository of a nightmare, a cold, clinical, and exhaustive record of everything that was lost, everything that was stolen, and everything that was finally, painstakingly reclaimed. We are no longer discussing the tragedy. We are discussing the preservation of the truth against the inevitable, eroding influence of time. The Archive of Shadows, as it has come to be known, is now a permanent fixture in the Regional Legal Library. It is not open to the public in the sense of a museum. It is a controlled, secured resource for historians, criminologists, and the families who may still be grappling with the ripples of the butcher's 40-year career. Its existence is the ultimate victory over the killer's primary methodology. He relied on the fragmentation of information, the fact that files were spread across different jurisdictions, that reports were lost in the shuffle of administrative turnover, and that the collective memory of the town was a fading, unreliable thing. By consolidating his entire predatory history into a single, cohesive archive, we have neutralized his power. He can no longer exist as a scattered series of events. He exists as a singular, recorded fact. The archive is the cage that he can never escape. In this 13th expansion, we must also consider the philosophical evolution of the investigative team. The detectives who lived through the excavation, who heard the audio recordings and who spent years immersed in the butcher's internal, pseudo-philosophical journals, have been permanently altered. They have transitioned from being professionals who process cases to being professionals who understand the nature of the cold case as a persistent moral burden. They have established a new, informal fellowship and network of investigators across the state who share a common, unyielding philosophy that the victim's right to the truth does not have an expiration date. This, perhaps, is the most lasting legacy of the Blackwood Creek case. It has created a generation of investigators who are no longer content with the dead end, but who view every unsolved file as a temporary failure that must be corrected. The community of Blackwood Creek, meanwhile, has reached a state of tempered normalcy. They have not forgotten, but they have moved from a state of acute, reactive trauma to a state of sustained, historical awareness. The Weeping Willow site has become a focal point of this new identity, a place where the town can gather to recognize that their peace was bought at an agonizing price. The act of visiting the site is no longer one of fear, but one of recognition. It is an acknowledgement that the darkness exists, that it can reside within the most benign-looking corners of the human world, and that the town is now, and will always be, committed to the light. This is the new, structural health of the community. They are no longer a town of strangers living in the shadow of unspoken fears. They are a town of citizens who know their own history, who accept their own vulnerabilities, and who have decided that the truth is the most effective form of communal defense. The victims' families continue to operate the Evelyn Thorne Initiative, and as they move into their second year of formal operation, they have begun to expand their focus beyond the local region. They are partnering with national forensic labs to develop new, cost-effective methods for analyzing the legacy of John and Jane Doe cases from the late 20th century. They are providing the funding, the logistical support, and most importantly, the emotional, trauma-informed guidance to investigators who are working on cases that have been stagnant for decades. Their work is a direct continuation of the butcher's final, involuntary service to the world. He forced us to become better at finding the monsters, and the families are ensuring that the world uses those skills to the benefit of all who have been lost. As we reach this 13th milestone, we must also address the state of the butcher himself. He remains in the high-security facility, a man who has been stripped of the one thing he valued above all else, his relevance. He is no longer the center of a town's fear, nor is he a subject of mystery. He is merely an aging, discarded, and thoroughly analyzed prisoner of the state. His life, which was dedicated to the systematic erasure of others, has ended in the total erasure of his own name from the narrative of his home. He is the man who is not spoken of, the man who is not remembered, and the man who, in the end, achieved exactly what he deserved: a lifetime of total, profound insignificance. The landscape of the town has also settled into a new, architectural harmony. The properties that were once associated with the butcher have been repurposed. Some have been cleared and donated to the town's park system, while others have been sold, their histories meticulously disclosed, their previous lives fully purged. Blackwood Creek is a place that has been physically, metaphorically, and institutionally cleaned. It is a town that has been through a crucible and has emerged on the other side, perhaps a bit harder, a bit more guarded, but fundamentally more alive. They have realized that the truth is not a burden. It is the oxygen that a community requires to truly breathe. We close this 13th reflection with a final, lingering thought on the nature of justice. Justice in the Blackwood Creek case was not a grand, singular event. It was the accumulation of a million tiny, agonizing choices made by people who refused to let the darkness win. It was the choice of the sister, who never stopped asking questions, the choice of the forensic technician, who went back to the samples for the 10th time, the choice of the prosecutor, who refused to compromise, and the choice of the community that, however late, finally decided to see. Justice, in the end, is not something that is delivered by the state. It is something that is constructed by the people, one act of courage at a time. This, then, is the 13th word. The saga of the mystery killer is history. The mystery is over. The archive is closed, the record is set, and the truth, in all its stark and necessary weight, remains standing. Blackwood Creek, the town that once lived in fear of a phantom, now stands as a testament to the endurance of the truth, forever changed by the fire, but finally and completely reclaimed by the light. The journey through the Valley of the Shadow has concluded, and what remains is the clear, open horizon of a future that is finally, mercifully, free. The case is closed. The chronicle is finished. The light remains. And in the silence that follows, we find the peace that only the truth can provide. The mystery is dead. The truth lives. The light is total. The resolution of the Blackwood Creek saga has reached a state of historical sedimentation, where the raw, explosive truths of the trial have settled into the steady, enduring reality of a community that knows exactly what it has survived. In this 14th expansion of our chronicle, we turn our attention to the final, necessary integration, the transition of the Blackwood Butcher from a living, breathing, and terrifying presence into a fixed, inanimate point in the regional history books. We are no longer observing a developing story. We are observing the final, stabilizing process of closure. The Archive of Shadows is now fully sequestered, its contents cataloged, and its impact codified. The town has stopped looking over its shoulder, not because the fear has vanished. Fear is a memory that doesn't simply evaporate, but because the fear has been rendered obsolete by the sheer, overwhelming light of the truth. We must consider the philosophical shift that has occurred within the town's civic identity. Blackwood Creek is currently engaged in the task of re-narrativization. They are rewriting the local history, not to erase the butcher, but to place him in his proper, diminished context. The town's historical society has been tasked with creating an official record of the 1987 to 2026 era, a project that is as much about psychological recovery as it is about historiography. They are cataloging not just the crimes, but the systemic failures, the moments of communal blindness, and the incredible, persistent efforts of the victims' families who kept the fire burning for 40 years. This record will serve as a permanent, pedagogical tool for future generations, ensuring that no one in Blackwood Creek will ever again mistake a good neighbor for a good person without the necessary, critical scrutiny. This is the ultimate, mature evolution of the town. They have realized that their history is not something that happens to them, but something that they must actively, consciously curate. The investigators, now veterans of the most significant case of their lives, have begun the process of debriefing the town's institutions. They are conducting a series of closed-door seminars for the local police, the school board, and the municipal offices, teaching them how to recognize the markers of predatory behavior, how to handle the initial report of a disappearance with the necessary urgency, and how to maintain the forensic integrity of a case long after the initial trail has gone cold. Their expertise is becoming a vital commodity, sought after by agencies across the state. They have become the architects of the Blackwood Standard, a set of best practices that will serve as the town's most important gift to the broader world. The tragedy of Evelyn Thorne has become a source of systemic immunity, a transformation that is as practical as it is profound. The families of the victims have also reached a new stage of their journey. The Evelyn Thorne Initiative is now a fixture of the town's infrastructure, a permanent, self-sustaining organization that is actively influencing state legislation on the storage of forensic samples and the funding of cold case units. They are no longer the grieving survivors of a forgotten injustice. They are the empowered, knowledgeable architects of a new legal reality. Their work is a daily, living tribute to the lives that were taken, and it provides a sense of purpose that has allowed them to finally, truly begin the process of healing. They have reclaimed the narrative of their loss, turning it into a force that is actively preventing other families from ever having to endure the same agonizing path of uncertainty. The butcher himself, in his state-run confinement, has become a complete non-entity. He has been subjected to a final, comprehensive psychological analysis, the results of which will be used in future psychiatric research into the nature of the compartmentalized predator. He is not a celebrity in his prison. He is a curiosity, a specimen, a man who believed himself to be a mastermind and who has ended his life as a thoroughly understood, completely categorized, and utterly unremarkable inhabitant of a concrete cell. His attempts at creating a legacy have resulted in the creation of a textbook on how to catch him. He is the master of his own destruction, the man who spent 40 years building a monument to his own cleverness, only to provide the foundational data for his own clinical dissection. As we look at the landscape of Blackwood Creek today, we see a town that is finally, fully inhabiting its own time. The summer gardens are lush. The streets are filled with the normal, unhurried cadence of suburban life, and the parks are vibrant with the noise of children playing. The shadow has been lifted, not by the passage of time, but by the application of the truth. The town knows that they were capable of housing a monster for 4 decades, and they know that they are capable of defeating him through the sheer, grinding persistence of the truth. They are a community that has looked into the abyss, has seen the horror for what it is, and has decided, collectively, to turn around and walk away from it forever. This 14th reflection serves as the final, internal consolidation of our narrative. We have documented the shift from the chaos of the 80s to the clarity of the present. We have tracked the movement of truth from the shadows of a hidden grave into the bright, unyielding records of the state. We have witnessed the evolution of a community from a place of fractured, silent grief into a beacon of collective resilience. The story of the Blackwood Creek mystery is officially, entirely, and irrevocably over. The narrative is no longer an unfolding event. It is a fixed point in our history, a standard against which all future investigations will be measured. As we bring this monumental record to its ultimate, final stages, we reflect on the nature of light and shadow. The killer lived by the shadow, and he was consumed by it. The community lived in the shadow, and they were, for a time, diminished by it. But by embracing the uncomfortable, jagged reality of the truth, they emerged into a light that is now entirely their own. The mystery killer is a relic of the past, a ghost that was finally trapped, identified, and silenced by the weight of the evidence and the light of the truth. Our 14-part journey through the darkest valleys of this case has concluded. We have reached the other side, and in doing so, we have learned the most important lesson of all, that the human capacity for truth is, in the final analysis, more enduring than any lie. The case is closed. The record is final. The memory lives on, an anchor in the storm of history, reminding us that we are capable of facing our own deepest shadows and emerging, irrevocably, into the light. This is the word. The saga of the mystery killer is history. The truth remains. The record is complete. Blackwood Creek, the town that once lived in fear of a phantom, now stands as a testament to the endurance of the truth, forever changed by the fire, but finally and completely reclaimed by the light. The journey through the valley has reached the horizon, and the truth, clear, absolute, and unyielding, is the final horizon we reach. The end. The 14th movement of our chronicle brought us to the threshold of historical sedimentation. Now, in this 15th stage, we examine the final, quiet echoes of the Blackwood Creek saga as it dissolves from a living trauma into the bedrock of local lore. We have dismantled the butcher, we have audited the town, and we have established the Archive of Shadows as an unassailable bastion of record. Yet, there remains the delicate, ethereal matter of what the community does with the silence that now follows such a monumental, prolonged roar. The town is no longer engaged in the frantic, necessary labor of an active investigation. It is engaged in the long, slow, and deeply human process of living after. For the residents of Blackwood Creek, this is the most difficult transition of all. During the years of the cold case, and especially during the harrowing months of the excavation and trial, the town was unified by a singular, intense objective: to see the butcher caught, tried, and silenced. The investigation provided a structure to their grief, a container for their rage, and a target for their collective energy. Now, that structure has been removed. The monster is in a cell, the evidence is in the archives, and the daily grind of suburban life has resumed. This return to normalcy is, for many, the most disorienting experience of the entire saga. They have spent years defining themselves in opposition to the shadow, and now that the shadow is gone, they are forced to define themselves as simply a town, with all the mundane complexities that implies. This phase of the story is characterized by the quiet, essential work of maintenance, not just the maintenance of the memorial gardens or the archives, but the maintenance of the truth they fought so hard to reclaim. The town council has formalized the Day of Remembrance, an annual gathering that is explicitly designed to prevent the event from being romanticized or relegated to a mere entry in a history book. It is a day where the focus remains steadfastly on the victims, where their names are read aloud, and where the community renews its vow to never again trade its vigilance for the comfortable convenience of silence. It is an act of communal hygiene, a way of ensuring that the trauma does not fester, but instead serves as a permanent, healthy reminder of the cost of their freedom. The investigators, too, are navigating this period of transition. The task force that was the beating heart of the resolution has been officially disbanded, its members returning to their respective departments or moving into the roles of senior advisory consultants. They still gather, informally, once a month, a group of people who possess a shared, secret knowledge of the darkest corners of Blackwood Creek. They are the keepers of the procedural memory, the ones who know exactly how many nights they spent in the storage unit, how many leads turned to ash, and how close they came to failing. Their shared bond is the glue that holds the memory of the investigation together, a private, essential brotherhood that understands that the case wasn't just solved, it was survived. Meanwhile, the Evelyn Thorne Initiative has become a model for institutional stability. They have successfully lobbied for the establishment of a state-funded forensic science residency at the local university, a program that will train the next generation of crime scene analysts in the very methodologies that finally caught the butcher. By embedding this expertise directly into the fabric of the state, they are ensuring that the lessons of the Blackwood case are not lost to time or bureaucratic drift. The butcher's legacy, as far as they are concerned, is the creation of a system that is fundamentally faster, smarter, and more relentless than he ever was. They are the architects of a future where the unsolved is an anomaly, not an expected outcome. We must also look at the physical landscape of Blackwood Creek one final time. The sites that once held such morbid fascination have been completely reclaimed. The Victorian house where the metallic box was first found has been renovated, its history fully disclosed to the new, young family who moved in with the explicit goal of starting over. They treat the home as a blank slate, a place where they are consciously building new, happy memories to replace the dark ones that resided there for decades. It is a quiet, powerful act of defiance. The town has decided that they will not let their geography be defined by the butcher's predations. They are layering over the past with the vitality of the present, a process that is as organic as it is necessary. As the months turn into years, the Blackwood Creek saga is becoming a fixture of regional literature and documentary study, but the town itself remains remarkably, defiantly ordinary. They have resisted the urge to